Hey guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. Today we will see what if Kekkei Tota. If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. An annoyed sigh slid past his lips. The old man's eyes glanced around the small clearing, focusing his attention finally on one of the only people for the next 5 miles. Or at least he really hoped that to be the case. But knowing his luck, it was most likely not to be. Someone else would know, or at the very least would find out soon. We can't have this. Not now. Not with everything going around. He couldn't in all honesty blame anyone other than himself though. He knew this day would come. And what would come of it could only be called his own fault. If he had said something beforehand to the boy, at least things would not be so hard. But now as it was, he would have to do a lot of explaining. So what do we do? The old village leader didn't answer verbally. Instead he began to move towards the blond boy, sidestepping the glittering spires with ease. It was really a remarkable sight. Towering spears the colors of the rainbow had tore through the ground, the failing sunlight dancing in their reflection. It was a moment that Sarutobi would always remember. But he couldn't stop to stare now. Too much work to do in too little time. This won't turn out good, sensei. No matter how much we try to hide it. Sarutobi snorted as he approached the downed genin. Don't you think I know that? But it can't be helped at this point. Jiraiya of the Sannin shifted uncomfortably. I don't think anyone else was around when it happened. But we had to assume that others know. A pause as something occurred to him. Does anyone else know? My former teammates. Sarutobi answered as he bent down and moved his hand to check the boy's pulse. And a few more trustworthy Anbu who reported it originally. I can trust them well enough to keep it a secret considering they've done it up to this point. He smiled wryly. Why do you think those two put up with Naruto's foolishness for so long? The Sannin frowned. I would have thought those two the worst to know. How did you keep them under control? The old Hokage turned his head and shot his old pupil a frown. Contrary to your belief, Jiraiya, my teammates are not heartless monsters. They only do what they think is best for the village. The same can be said for Danzo. They understand that the burden Naruto bears is large enough as it is. Putting him in the spotlight or breeding programs would have caused unwanted questions. And it wouldn't be long before that information spreads out to other villages. What do you think would have happened then? The Sannin's frown deepened. He didn't have to think hard. Obviously they would begin to pry. Which would lead them to the facts that Konoha wanted to keep the most quiet. Eventually they would all be unraveled. Naruto would be ousted easy enough as the Kyuubi Jinchuriki. Then they would inquire as to his ancestry, which would get him in deep shit with Earth and Lightning. Everyone would want him. The only choices though would be kidnapping and assassination. He would be too loyal to even consider betraying Konoha. All in all, it would not be pretty. What are we going to do? The Sannin inquired, obviously at a loss. A seal? No. Sarutobi responded quickly as he rose. I've already sealed him once. This ability surfaced earlier in his life, when he was emotionally distressed. He doesn't remember, far too young, but I don't want to even begin to think of doing it to him again. Besides, we can't if he was supposedly screaming bloody murder. Quote, why didn't you say something to me before? Jiraiya began to argue. Why would you keep something like that under wraps for so long? For the same reason I keep the Kyuubi a secret. Puffing on his newly lighted pipe with his back still turned. To keep him safe. The Sannin opened his mouth to say something but quickly closed it. He could find no fault with that. Naruto needed all the protection he could get. Well, there are some positives. When he first showed this talent, it had been more than surprising to say the least. The last I believed to have it was Kushina's grandfather. He was ancient when I saw him. But I do have a good idea of some of the techniques he used. Saw a few of them. It is really useful. It would most certainly be one of the more powerful ones had it been more constant. Sarutobi nodded absent-mindedly. If anything, this will help him greatly if he can keep it under wraps enough. But this is Naruto we're talking about. Jiraiya started with a frown. In the meantime, it changes things quite a bit. His chakra's violent reaction has opened up a new can of worms to say the least. And it completely changes the way I had planned to do things. I'll train him. Jiraiya blinked, surprised. The words had been said so quickly and at the same time so resolutely. I'm sorry? Come again, sensei? He had to make sure he heard that correctly. Sarutobi finally turned to his former student, eyes full of conviction. For too long I've held Naruto back from his potential. Held him from the truth. Not anymore. I am getting old, Jiraiya. I am no longer a cage in terms of strength. But I am a teacher. You a primary example. He pulled his pipe from his mouth. So here's what we'll do. I'll take over his training for the exam. There's still a month and a half left to teach him from here on out. You, and my teammates, will help. He will be the future protector of Konoha just as he always wanted. Just like his father wanted. Jiraiya's face became grave. What are you talking about, sensei? You have a village to run. The old Hokage shook his head again. Not anymore. My time is almost done. I have only a few years left. If worst comes to worst, Kakashi can take over for me. But for right now, while I have the chance and the ability to still move, I want to begin to train my successor. Just like my sensei did for me. Your successor? Jiraiya asked, incredulous. Do you really believe he can do it? The Hokage snorted. You've known him for 2 weeks now. Do you doubt? To this the Sannin could say nothing. The boy was more than a little rough around the edges, but the talent was there in spades. He was a mess in terms of the fundamentals, but made up for it with his unpredictable nature and sheer determination. The boy had the natural talent, to be sure. It was the skill and experience he needed. It will take time, maybe more than I have left, but I will at least see him on his way. You have seen the amount of potential he has. He needs no Kekkei Genkai or Biju. His determination and drive alone can push him to the top. Jiraiya smiled. He's a lot like her in that way. Another pause. Does he know of her? Sarutobi immediately shook his head. No, too young to remember her. Another grave mistake of mine. But again, for his protection. Just think of the fallout around the village if they found out he was related to the killer of our last daimyo. Again, no thinking necessary. They would have skinned him alive. Another knock. Kid is going to flip. Correct. Which is why you have to place an overlapping seal in place. It's actually already done. I wanted him to grow first on his own power. This came about because the seal I placed limited the Kyuubi's chakra and forced his out more. Then I taught him water walking, he got it. His chakra control when the seal is released will be great improved. From there I moved to work on his natures. That's when it happened. The Hokage replaced his pipe. I suppose that's when things went south per se. Of course. Wind, earth, and water. 3? The Hokage asked with genuine surprise as his eyebrow rose up. 3? He had 3. But he considered himself the only one. Every other shinobi he had met only had 2 at the most. But then again, it did make sense. Then again, if Naruto had the talent he expected, then there would be no reason to think he would stop now. And you're worried if he has the potential. Didn't say that. Jiraiya protested. I question his maturity. Which will come in time. I will make sure of it. After all, you were a handful as well. The Hokage began to weave around the crystals again as he stepped back to the Sannin. His chakra is spent, which means he'll be out until tomorrow at least. We have to move quickly to turn this in our favor. I'm going to take Naruto with me and find my teammates. You get rid of the evidence. If you know how. Yes, I saw it. Lighting, wind, and fire nature chakra can tear them down if I hit them hard enough. Or I can just use the pure chakra nature of the Rasengan to break them apart. Good. I'll inform them of the plan and then I'll tell him. From there it's up to me to work at him. I'll start with working on jutsu befitting his nature. You'll work on what techniques you do know regarding this release. They will be impersonating me to keep everything as quiet as it can be. Alright then. This is going to be tricky to pull off. Yes, but not impossible. Hurry now. Yes, sensei. Shit. A grin accompanied the hiss of words. His left hand reaching out and firmly grasping his right wrist in an attempt to apply pressure and stem the flow of blood. His middle finger had been broken in 2 places, his ringer finger tilted sideways, and he was missing his thumb. Hand now in ruins. It would have been a grave and serious injury, career-ending in fact, for anyone. That is anyone except for him. It was one of the few positives his unique situation brought him. His teeth snapped together as he fell back onto his behind and leaned his back against a free tree. Closing his eyes and forcing himself to think of something other than the pain ripping through his arm right now. It was his own fault really. What reason did he have to really push this hard? After all, he really had no real intention of continuing on his path of a shinobi. For what reason did he have to push himself to such harsh extremes? Especially when he knew it would only lead him to more failure. Because it's the only way you'll ever get any answers, Naruto. The grin faltered for half a second before it completely fell apart. A pain-filled sigh racked his body. It wasn't physical though. It was mental, emotional. Naruto, age 12, was so tired of living. Of life in general. He had liked to think of himself as a good person with good morals. He didn't like causing people harm. And he didn't think his dreams and aspirations were anything to laugh at. Or at least he didn't used to. But now, was Cammy laughing at him right now? Was his life just one big joke? Just a big fucking sitcom? It had to be. It was the only explanation that he could think of. No use in feeling sorry for yourself though. He had learned a long time ago that crying would not fix your problems for you. Or at least not for him. There were no fixing his problems. Only adding to them. You really are a pathetic sort, aren't you? A bitter smile broke out over the thought. The pain in his hand now a dull ache. It would be completely healed by tomorrow. That had been assured by the fox demon the moment the injury had occurred if the sudden twinge in his stomach was anything to go by. An increase in the amount of chakra that the seal let through had been an unwanted side effect of the seal work done by the toad Sanin. He couldn't blame the man though. He was trying to help prevent something awful from occurring thanks to his old traitor teammate. Still, would it have been so bad? He found himself questioning as he leaned his head back against the tree bark and closed his eyes. Letting it all end here? Fade away. Why do you do this to yourself? The training grounds in the village hidden within the leaves were unique in the way they were made. Terrains usually varied but at the same time were suitable for all sources of training. With that in mind, people rarely ever ventured too far away from the center of the village when looking for somewhere to train. But unfortunately for Sarutobi Hiruzen, the boy he had tracked this far wasn't most people. And for that reason he found himself far from his home on this chilly fall night. His old tired eyes looked onto the form of the small child sitting in front of him. Chest heaving ever so slightly to show how the physical exercises had taken its toll on his usually godlike stamina reserves. One eye opened and regarded the short man with a pensive look before snapping back shut. Shooting the Hokage a devilish grin, the boy leaned backwards and flopped onto the ground. Why not push myself? Should I really be concerned? Sarutobi Hiruzen frowned, unable to fully impede the sudden flash of annoyance that rushed through his body at the casual response. But he could not deny that it was true. It was useless to do so anyway and useless to get upset by it. Irrational even. He should have expected that exact response from the moment he opened his mouth to voice the question. Do you hate me, Naruto? I'm nearly overflowing with hatred. Sarutobi jumped in surprise despite how soft the words had been spoken. Turning his eyes to the blonde laying before him. The emotion behind each letter flowed from the blonde and into him. Deep within his pores and spreading through his entire being. He could almost feel that same emotion in his veins. Not with someone or something in particular though. Naruto continued just as softly. And most certainly not at myself. Not anymore at least, but rather with the whole of our existence. The Sandaime Hokage could not prevent himself from inhaling deeply from his pipe. A reaction that served as a sign to his comfort levels. A little tick that was bad for ninja to have. One that only seemed to surface around this particular boy. He unconsciously pulled his ceremonial robes even tighter to his body in an attempt to ward off the sudden chill. Despite there being no wind. I see, he muttered around his pipe. One blue eye snapped open again despite the fact that it could not see the old man standing near the base of the feet. The other joining it as the blonde gave a noise of disapproval. No, I don't think you do. In fact, I know you don't. The boy contradicted. This isn't just a great disgust or high dislike for life in general. No, this is full-blown hatred. I hate this existence, or rather the lack of my own. The way the world seems to disregard me entirely. This is a legitimate hatred. To this Sarutobi could not respond, closing his tired and weary eyes in an attempt to shake off his budding headache. A tired and long sigh escaped him, one of pity for the boy who laid before him. No one, especially not this child, deserved to be so worn down. To be so old and feel so tired despite the fact that he was so young. And yet he would never let it show for the fear that the boy would take it wrong. Naruto was far too strong for pity. Far stronger than he could ever be. Let me ask you something, Naruto. Pulling his pipe free from his lips. He paused until he was sure he had the boy's attention. Do you hate some more than others? The in question snorted. Of course I do. Or I be nothing more than a damn monster like they always said I was. Unable to determine what exactly started this cycle. What a sad thing that would be. A brittle smile. At that point I'd just be giving in to them, huh? A monster. A product of my environment. I never want that damn thing to happen. Sarutobi nodded. And who in particular do you hate more? Do you honestly need me to answer that question? No, of course not, because I already know. I'm sure you never wished you were just an orphan. Naruto began. But then again, I don't know your situation growing up. Nothing like yours, I assure you. But I do. I wish it all the time now. I would rather have all my family dead. Or have all my family be ignorant of my life. Hell, I think I'd be better off just wondering. But to have family and for them to not even look at you. For them to treat you like these other ignorant people. Sarutobi resisted the urge to protest that. To say he believed in him. Because he could not in all honesty say that he never entertained the idea that Naruto would be something other than what the Yondaime Hokage had said. Not without disrespecting both of them. And he had come to respected both of them far too much for that. An echo of words spoken what seemed so long ago by this very boy rang out in his head. Bringing new light to how wise the boy had always been. There's no worse pain in the world than to have something for the first time in your life. Only for it to be let go. And then finding out that you have family out there. Just as you always wanted. But for them to not even acknowledge your existence. It was the only time Sarutobi had ever even considered Naruto broken. But to his credit, the boy had just managed to keep going. He would have surely faltered long ago. The boy was in sudden movement. Pulling his legs up until his knees met his chest before sliding his hands back behind his head and pushing himself into a half flip. Catching himself onto his feet and turning his back to the old Hokage. Sarutobi looked away to the sky as the blonde dusted off his orange jumpsuit. A mockery. Good ninja didn't wear bright colors. Only legends did. If you're good enough to kill me, then so be it. He knew this symbol would be universal someday. See ya around, old man. Got a lot to do tomorrow. Sarutobi gave him a nod of agreement as he looked off into the night sky. For some reason the moon always shined brighter on this particular training ground. Looking like a big diamond in the sky. And in his mind's eye he could remember as it reflected off her eyes. Hey old man. He turned his head to the blonde. Naruto had stopped walking but had not turned his head to meet his gaze. Do you think it's okay to want to die? If he was disturbed or surprised by the question, he did not show it. Instead, taking another puff of his pipe. Yes, no one should ever wish for death. And for doing so they are a coward. No one ever has an excuse for it. A weak grin. Except you, Naruto. He could tell that was exactly what the boy wanted to hear. You really are a dumb ass, huh? The blonde boy cracked open one eye and raised it up the tree. Speak of the devil. The toad Sanin, self-proclaimed super pervert, was staring down at him. Looking none too happy. Whatever it was, Naruto didn't seem to think he could bring himself to care anymore. You're better than this kid. He couldn't stop the snort that escaped him. How would you know? We've only just met, right? I've seen enough in these 2 weeks. I've seen what you've been like before, kid. And this isn't you. Or at least it didn't used to be. The boy could practically hear the disappointment in the man's voice. Not that he cared anyway. It didn't matter what the old ninja thought. He was done looking for the approval of others. Jiraiya took his silence with a frown and dropped down without a sound onto the ground in front of him. Naruto regarded him with a one-eyed look for a second before closing it again. Relishing the brief moment of silence. Unfortunately for him, it didn't last long enough. Look, kid, I can understand where you're coming from. I'll never fully comprehend, but I can gain a good view. Naruto met his words with a disbelieving snort. But I'll be damned if I let you sit around and wallow in your sorrow. Your father wouldn't like for you to. I don't give a damn. The words had been a near shout and had been spoken with so much venom in them that he was surprised himself. Jiraiya physically stepped back and flinched at the sudden explosion, looking at him with a glare before finally sighing and closing his eyes. I don't give a damn about him. Or what he wanted. I don't give a damn about anyone else. Just like they don't about me. I'm tired of being the good guy. I'm tired of always being the cheerful idiot. I'm tired of being too obtuse to see past what's really happening. Tired of acting like I don't understand. I'm done with it. Don't speak to me about him or his family. Or the woman who gave birth to me. And most certainly don't speak to me, Abu. The words caught themselves in his throat and he nearly choked himself on the emotion. Bowing his head to the ground and hiding his eyes from view behind his bangs. He would not cry. Not anymore. He was done. Done with being sad. Done with being happy. Done with being mad. But Jiraiya wasn't. "Look kid, I don't know what to say. But I know you shouldn't be mopping around like this. You haven't been to training in days. And I don't plan to go." Naruto muttered, "I'm done with being a ninja. After all the talk? About trying to be Hokage?" Jiraiya snorted, "That's crap because you want to be out here training right now. You said you want to be a legend. What's changed now? That was before your old teammate showed me how useless it all was. No matter what I do, those people will never respect me. Not even my own blood does." A surge of anger ran through the old shinobi and he could not help the snarl that ripped through his mouth. "Then make them respect you. Make me respect you, because I've lost it all. Show everyone you aren't one to be trifled with." His face falling and expression growing pensive. "Show them by proving them wrong. They deemed you as insignificant. A useless tool. People have used you up and thrown you away before. Now it's your turn for payback. Getting even." To this the blonde did look up, giving Jiraiya a skeptical look. "Forgive me for finding it hard to figure out what you're talking about. Like you haven't thought about it. A deal then? You get off your ass. Train hard. Get strong like we both know you can. And not with the fox demon. I mean on your own strength. If you're strong enough you can make it on your own. And in return I'll put everything else into second place to concentrate on finding the answers you seek. I'll find everyone that made you feel this way. And then you can beat the answers out of them. It'll be my top priority. Even over what the Hokage wants me to look for." The skeptical look had turned to one of pure disbelief now. It was too convenient, too easy. "And what do you want in return?" "I just get the satisfaction of seeing their faces when they realize how wrong they've been." "Do you really think I can?" "Of course. The real question you need to ask is to yourself. Are you willing to put in the effort to have what you want the most? To reach your goals?" "His goals?" "Yeah, your goals. Your new goals. Do you really want it?" He didn't need to answer. "Get up." Those two words had been said with such command that the body could not help but follow. Or at the very least try. Unfortunately Naruto's body had pretty much been spent now. Still he managed, after an extra minute or so, to push himself to his feet, swaying for a second as he fought for balance. The old Hokage frowned at the display but made no move to help the young boy. He had chosen to continue when he had been given the option to rest. It was the boy's own fault for trying to work himself into the ground. That was a pathetic attempt. He continued to comment, "If anything your technique regressed with that last one." Naruto grinned weakly and shrugged. "Unacceptable. Try it again." 3 hand seals later and the boy was trying to fill his lungs with as much air as he could. Focusing his slowly dwindling chakra around the sacs of air before expelling it as quickly as he could. Fuuten. Rinkuden. The Hokage watched impassively as the ball of condensed air exploded from the boy's mouth. It fired along the projected line towards one of the training post and collided with the wood. A grim satisfaction feeling him as he watched the wooden post become half a cloud of sawdust under the force of the ninjutsu. Acceptable for now. That was the best one so far. The Hokage commented, dressed in his own battle uniform for this occasion. It didn't lose form until it reached the target and did a suitable amount of damage. The blonde didn't reply, hands on his knees as he struggled to fill his lungs with needed air after forcefully expelling it. It will take time to manage the ninjutsu without adverse side effects like the one you're experiencing. But it also comes with extra benefits, such as expanded lungs. If anything, the human body underuses its potential. We don't use all our brain power and limit our physical abilities. Examples of this are seen under times of pressure. You do things that you were never before capable of because of the force of your will. You make your body step up to the challenge and because of it your abilities rise to the occasion. This is the idea behind the gates. Naruto again said nothing, simply nodding his head as he returned to upright position with his hands on his hips. To tell the truth, the Hokage was more than a little surprised by how attentive the boy was. He had expected one of two things. The first being the usual hyperactive and squirming young man people had come to know Naruto as, unwilling to sit and listen for directions. The second, and thought to be more likely, was a scowling and moody boy who did only what was necessary with little to no real effort, angered by the betrayal that had been set upon him. To his pleasant surprise he received neither. Instead he was met with a boy who did everything to the fullest. Who did intake everything he wanted to say and put it into practice on his next attempt. A boy who easily withheld the information and theory he was speaking of. It was a little frightening to be truthful. Had he always been capable of this? Had he, the person who claimed to only want the best for him, overlooked him like everyone else did? The answer was as painful as it was obvious. He had also painted Naruto in the light that he would struggle as a ninja. Not because of the way the boy acted, but because he had just originally assumed the boy had only average potential. How stupid that had been in hindsight. This was the only child of the Yondaime Hokage. Greatness was in his blood. Power and potential were his birthright. How many times had someone just sat down and began to work with him? How many times had someone taken the time to put aside their misconceptions enough to offer him individual training like they no doubt did for everyone else? Had Kakashi even considered taking Naruto on for someone-on-one work like he had jumped to do with Sasuke? Of course not, and because of it Naruto had been unable to grow. Mountains of wasted potential. No more. Can you go again? A nod and his hands clapped together to begin seals. Sarutobi could not stop the grin that slid into place even if he wanted to try. What I want you to do is actual very difficult. Naruto frowned as he listened, inhaling deeply as he struggled to catch his breath after another grueling training session. The old Hokage leaned casually against a nearby tree as he observed his newest pupil. It had been 2 weeks since they had began to train and Sarutobi was more than a little impressed. The boy had always struggled through schoolwork and didn't take well to verbal instruction. But when you showed him with movement and examples things seeped in at an alarming rate. Once Sarutobi had learned that the boy was more a kinesthetic learner, the way to his brain opened like the petals of a flower. The man had quickly learned that the best way to show the boy how to do something was to show him before beating it into him. It was working perfectly. As Jiraiya no doubt told you, jutsu can usually be broken down into 2 different types of techniques. Nature manipulation and shape manipulation. One uses pure chakra and the other changes chakra to match a certain element type. Like fire and water ninjutsu. The blonde commented as he followed along with the old shinobi. And things like Kawamari fall under the manipulation category. Sarutobi nodded. Correct. It showed that he had indeed been listening. His biggest problem. In order to make or truly master a ninjutsu you need to have at least a deep understanding in one of the 2 categories if not both. Jutsu that use them together are usually the most powerful types that fall under at least the B-rank category. A strong example of this is the Water Dragon Jutsu, which uses nature manipulation to mass together a great deal of water and then shape manipulation to form the dragon it is named for. The genin nodded as he followed along in what he had been saying. It made sense now that he had began to rationalize it in the terms the Hokage had used instead of the in-depth concepts that Amino Iruka preferred. With that being said, I'll take the idea of nature manipulation a bit deeper. Sarutobi said as he reached into his white robes and removed his customary pipe from wherever he hid it. I want to explain the idea behind elemental techniques, of which most are blood inheritance. The blonde sat up a little straighter as his train of thought merged onto the path the Sandaime Hokage must have been going towards. He formed a fist with his right hand as excitement started to run through him. He was finally going to begin what had always been denied to him. If Sarutobi noticed his sudden change in body language, he said nothing as he calmly lit his pipe with a fine manipulation of fire chakra. He took a deep breath and savored the sweet and smoky flavor of his tobacco before he removed his pipe and exhaled slowly. Some bloodline limits, he began slowly as the smoke dissipated, are actually not restricted to blood lineage. In reality, they simply need the right combination of chakra elements and the skill needed to combine them equal in order to produce the needed results. With that being said, they are usually restricted to families due to the chakra combinations being similar. From there it takes simply the proper training from older and more experienced members, who of course would not share the secrets with those who aren't of the blood. The young shinobi remained silent as he listened intently to his teacher. Those techniques are usually called Kekkei Genkai, the same as actual physical abelites such as the Hyuga's Byukugen or the Uchiha's Sharingan. However, there is something even more rare and in most cases more devastating. He paused here and stood from his position leaning against the tree to take a few steps to the genin. He placed his pipe back into his mouth and took another deep breath as he stopped just before the blonde. As I just said, an elemental Kekkei Genkai or bloodline limit uses 2 elements that are combined equally to create a completely new element. What many don't know is that there are an even more powerful combination of elemental chakra that requires at least 3 different elements. He paused to let that sink in. This sort of combination is known as a Kekkei Tota or bloodline selection. The genin blinked in surprise as he took in what the man had been saying. His mind briefly went back to the battle in Wave Country and the techniques the young boy who had taught him so much. It matched exactly what his opponent had told him before his final moments. By now you're no doubt thinking about your mission to Wave Country. The Hokage correctly guessed, and if not, that is the example I will use. According to the report, you became friends with a young boy who turned out to be one of your enemies. Now, apart from the fact that you should be more careful about who you speak to, I want to talk about his unique ninjutsu. The ice techniques, Naruto said. He mentioned everything you're saying. I just didn't understand it like now. Sarutobi nodded as he took another puff of his pipe. The Yuki clan used to indeed reside in water country. He continued. They specialized in water and, as you've guessed, ice ninjutsu. During the time before the great shinobi villages, when the clans did nothing but engang in constant battle with others, the Yuki clan once held an entire region near swamp country where they used the natural moisture to their advantage. And as such had decades to perfect their techniques. That is an example of an elemental Kekkei Genkai. As you can say from experience, it is extremely powerful and versatile. And as such the secrets are guarded jealously. It's what made the report about the boy you encountered so surprising. I had little personal contact with members of the Yuki clan, but I've never heard in all of my years as the Hokage of an ice-based technique that created mirrors. I'd wager that he personally created that technique under Momochi Zabuza's guidance. For someone his age to have used it with such a devastating effect meant that he had to have practiced extensively with it. With that line of thought, I can come to the conclusion that the boy created the ninjutsu quite a while before you ever encountered him. Years perhaps. For him to only have been a year or so older than you speaks volumes about his natural talent. Naruto nodded slowly as he listened. Indeed, it did say a lot about the kind of shinobi Haku must have been. The boy would have been hailed here in the village as another clan genius without a doubt. Maybe even more so than Sasuke or the Hyuga boy. And yet for all that talent he had died so easily when it all came down to it. It was a somber line of thinking. He had nowhere near as much talent. Now, with that being said, I want for you to understand the difference in ability between an elemental Kekkei Genkai and an elemental Kekkei Tota. The Hokage continued. First and foremost are the rarity. As I said before, Kekkei Tota are mostly unknown. The largest reason for that are the lack of them in our world. Apart from the ice ability you came across, I can tell you off the top of my head around 5 other elemental Kekkei Genkai, with the first 2 coming to mind being the scorch element made famous in Suna and the wood manipulation that my sensei became renowned for before he took on the mantle of the first Hokage. The Hokage removed his pipe and fixed a strong look onto the boy, which froze him in place. I can, in all my years as a shinobi, only tell you of one ability that officially counts as a Kekkei Tota. And the only 2 people who have ever shown the ability both became Tsuchikage. The blonde blinked as he took in the words and processed them. The idea that the abilities that Haku had shown were still another level under what they could have been was mind-blowing to say the least. The boy had been so powerful. Easily high Chunin level. The only real weakness he had shown was his own kindness. And despite the fact that he was the personal student of a well-known A-ranked Junin who specialized in stealth and assassinations, it still said volumes about the strength of his blood ability. But here the Hokage was telling him that in his 70 years as a shinobi he had come across a technique that was not only rarer but far more powerful. So much so that the only 2 people who could use it were S-class in terms of strength. Naruto was many things and far from bright, but he wasn't a complete fool. The fight between Kakashi and Zabuza would never truly be forgotten, and it helped show just how far he had to go. But even so, he knew just from his less than 5-minute bout in the second portion of the exams that the gap between Kakashi and the man known as Orochimaru was beyond large. The idea that one extra element meant the difference between high Chunin to Kage was astounding. The Jinten or dust release was first used by the Nidaime Tsuchikage. Mew had been known as the Null Man for his stealth capabilities. But even more devastating were his ninjutsu techniques based around the Jinten element. With this power he could destroy entire armies and crush his enemies at their most basic levels. In addition, his mastery over his ability even allowed him to fly for a period of time and lift objects well over 100 times his own weight. Naruto swallowed as he listened attentively. The techniques that the Sandaime Hokage were describing seemed beyond imagination. For as amazing as ninjutsu and the ninja arts in general were, Naruto never thought anything of this sort were remotely possible. That man passed the techniques on to his prized pupil, a distant nephew, who also shared the same 3 chakra natures he did. The Hokage smirked as something passed in his eyes. The battles I waged against the man who became Sandaime Tsuchikage were ground-shaking. And the more I think about it, the more sure I am that we, along with Ain's leader in Hanzo, have to be of a dying breed. From a time where the world around us was much more wild. The old shinobi shook his head to clear his mind. It would do him no good to start drifting down memory lane right now. Now, as I said, the dust release is the only official example I have of a Kekkei Tota. But for quite some time I have come to the conclusion that 2 other special elementals combinations could also require 3 natures. One is the magnet release of the now dead Sandaime Kekkei, who used his special chakra nature to combine shreds of iron powder used for smithing into something monstrous. He paused again and looked the boy in the eye. The second is the crystal release. Naruto froze still as he realized what the old man had been leading up to. The special ability that he had apparently only been able to use accidentally to this point. The chakra-based ninjutsu that caused all of this and made him feel as if he were being ripped apart from the inside. The memory of the pain was terrifying, but the idea that he had his own special ability was beyond exhilarating. The ability you've shown twice now, the Hokage said, was only seen by one other person in my time. A man known as Shinto. Uzumaki Shinto. He paused for a second before he dropped the bomb. The man who would have been your great-grandfather. The boy's heart nearly stopped as the words reached him. Another portion of his history revealed. More proof that despite what everyone had once told him about himself, the name Uzumaki actual did mean something. When I first meet that man, he was far along in his life. But like the Uzumaki clan had always been, he was full of vigor and healthy beyond what those his age should be. He sparred once with my sensei, the Shotomi Hokage, as an example to us of the younger generation about how far we had to go. He grinned here. Maybe if he had been 20 years younger, my supposedly unbeatable sensei would have lost. He turned his attention to look at the sky above them. The sunlight had begun to fail them and the stars would soon begin to peek at them from the night sky. They had been training for such a long time, and even still it wasn't enough. This day would not be over anytime soon. Your test with the chakra paper yesterday confirmed my long-held suspicion. He continued as he brought his attention back to the genin seated on the ground before him. Your chakra is far more developed than anyone else your age. Perhaps this is an effect of the Kyuubi or something to do with your status as a member of the Uzumaki. Or maybe you're just as special as you've always said you are. Any way you spin it, you have an advantage most people never have, let alone most ninja under Junin. I intend for you to use that. Naruto simply nodded as he began to stand. His breathing had long since calmed down and he had retained everything the man had told him. He had so many questions and things he wanted answered, but he had learned that there was a time and place for that. Now was not that time. We'll begin right away, Sarutobi said. We don't have the time needed to show you how to properly manipulate elemental nature. That's something that takes decades. However, the fact you've used this ability twice now without any prior training means the requirements for at least early usage is low and your body has the chakra memory necessary to use it. Naruto nodded as he took another deep breath and rolled his shoulders. Good. Now to start, we have to first begin on the basic applications of each 3 natures. The Hokage began as he led his newest student onto the path to controlling his unique elemental chakra. The genin exhaled slowly as the chill reached his skin. Goosebumps rose up as his breath condensed the air in front of him. He stood shirtless as he marveled at the work of the Sandaime Hokage for what had to have been the 10th time that evening. The man was far more genius than he could have ever imagined. To have frozen an entire lake solid in mid-spring with simple manipulation of chakra spoke volumes about what the man could accomplish. And it showed him how far he would have to go. Focus. The blonde chided himself as his blue eyes glanced around his bare surroundings. Where is he? He currently stood atop the man-made ice ring without a shirt and in simple shorts. The rules to this particular exercise were simple. Keep from falling unconscious. The icy footing made it difficult to keep his balance and forced him to continuously regulate a flow of chakra to his feet to keep his footing reliable. At the same time he was to keep a slow flow of chakra from the pores on his upper body in an attempt to keep himself from freezing. This was an advanced sort of chakra training the Sandaime had introduced the day before. After he had successfully learned the water walking exercise to the degree that he was capable of sustained combat while staying upright, the Hokage had immediately pulled him from the surface of the water before he used a single ninjutsu to freeze it to the core. As he watched in awe, the boy kept an ear open to the words the old man imparted onto him. You never know what kind of environment you'll be deployed into and what kind of challenges you would meet there. And so you should always try to prepare as best as possible for it all. The old shinobi went on to tell him of the different long-term assignments he had taken during his youth and the different environments he had been deployed into during the days of war. He went on to say how something as simple as letting the smell of a swamp distract you could mean the difference between life or death. Or worse, winning a war and losing it. You never know what to truly expect, Naruto. The man had said as he finished his ninjutsu. As you rise in rank and reputation, you'll be allotted missions that offer both a higher pay raise and a higher level of danger. From that point on, the intelligence we give you can only take you so far. A number of things can change or go overlooked. Or perhaps your client will even flat out lie to you. I think you know exactly what I mean. He did. He took note of those words as well. Just as he did everything the old Hokage had thrown at him. In fact, the more time he spent with the old leader, the more he came to love the man's teaching style. It was unlike anything he had ever encountered before. It was a mixture of both sink and swim with a hint of, this is why this happens. Cause and effect with visual and physical examples. It worked for him, and it was showing. For the first time in a long time, Naruto enjoyed training. He enjoyed learning about the world of the ninja. Instead of going through the motions, he woke up every day with an eagerness to begin while going to bed at night tired yet satisfied. He knew it couldn't last forever, so he took in everything he could as fast as he could. There were 2 weeks left before the exam. He was prepared to make them count. The slight shuffle on the wind reached his sensitive ears. The boy was moving a long time before the shuriken even reached his position. He moved across the ice in a controlled slide as he focused all his senses onto the world around him. The chakra on his skin tingled and rippled as it reached out to the world around him. They had learned a week prior that he had minor talent as a sensor. If it came from blood or from the 9 tails, they did not know, but it was useful nonetheless and added another thing for Naruto to focus his training on. Another avenue to increase his skill. For now he had little to no skill with it, but he knew enough to help him find the direction of chakra that traveled towards him. Like the flow underneath the ice below his feet. With an application of control he didn't have before, the blonde shifted his chakra through his soles and into the frigid ice below him. He stopped immediately before he hopped backwards. The timing was perfect as the meaty fist ripped from before him. He stopped and juked sideways as the summon fully freed himself from the water before rushing right at him. He had quickly come to respect the strength of the Sarutobi head's contract. They were physically imposing and agile in ways that a human could never be. Their tails acted as extra limbs, and with their tremendous strength they made for excellent fighters in terms of taijutsu. Something he had come to find out the hard way. The block came up in a near textbook example of what the Hokage had shown him. Rigid and firm, it served its purpose and stopped the haymaker inches before it met his face. He retreated quickly as the slightly taller animal began to press its attack. Fist flew, feet flailed, and the tail twirled as his opponent for the day sought to teach him taijutsu the hard way. And the boy was quick to show what he had learned in response. Block after block and strike after strike, the blonde struggled but nevertheless kept up with his assailant. The two danced across the frozen surface of the lake with a flurry of motion that normal people could barely see, much less follow. Naruto ducked low under a hook before he lashed out a right sweeping punch of his own aimed for the ribs. It was slapped aside, and the monkey to the chance to lean forward and fire off a quick knee towards the unprotected side the overextension created. The blonde was ready for that, and with a slight application of his chakra in a circular motion he adjusted his footing and slid his body to the opposite side and brought the same arm in a returning back fist. The quick twitch fibers of the summon allowed it to avoid the strike by leaning its head back with its legs still extended. Falling backward, it caught itself with its right hand while its left leg switched the attempted knee into a front kick. The blow landed home and the genin was uprooted from his feet but still maintained enough control to avoid from falling backwards. Instinctively his chakra reattached his footing and he forced himself to breath as the assault continued. He raised his arms to defend each punch and shifted his base to avoid each kick. Taijutsu had never been one of his strong points, something that could now be contributed to his lack of proper education. But now he felt that he could at least take on most chunin. And he would fight no one as strong or as fast as the Sandaime anytime soon. He may not be able to beat the Hyuga genius in a straight-up physical fight at this point, but at least he wouldn't go down on the first few blows. Enough. The two combatants instantly split apart at the command. The genin huffed and heaved as he took the time to catch his breath. The Hokage calmly stepped out onto the ice and walked towards them with his arms clasped behind his back. He looked over the two of them each before he nodded as he apparently found something he liked. "Very good, both of you," he commented as he puffed merrily on his tobacco. "It seems as if you've actually got a workout from this Sanji." The monkey, Sanji, nodded in reply as he too took the time to catch his bearings. A stirring of pride began to rise from deep within the genin as he realized that he had caused that. The first time they had sparred the week prior he had barely been able to manage a full minute before he had been knocked down. Now he had nearly fought to a standstill. "Thank you for your help. And please send Enma my thanks as well." The monkey nodded before it bowed to them both and dispelled. Sarutobi waited for the smoke to clear before he focused his attention solely on the blonde. "That was excellent work today. You've come a long way in your taijutsu in such a short time," he complimented. And it was true. More and more the genin impressed him with his capacity for learning. It is imperative that you keep your taijutsu training up. Many young shinobi overlook it for the flashy abilities of ninjutsu when it can be the difference between life and death. Obviously, to be a Hokage you have to have some proficiency in each of the three main phases, but the best thing to do is to become well-rounded enough. The genin frowned. "I thought working on too many skill was a bad thing." It was one of the few things he remembered from the academy. The Hokage nodded slowly. "Yes and no. Most shinobi have neither the talent or the patience needed to completely round themselves. And it can be a bad thing to be a jack of all trades. But at the same time it can successfully cover weaknesses. You don't have that kind of excuse. You have the talent," Sarutobi argued. Naruto nodded as he rolled his shoulders. "So what's next?" "Next we'll begin summoning," the Hokage replied. "I have a surprise for you. For all your hard work." The blonde grinned slightly before he smothered it down. "What I have in mind for you," he continued, "is both beyond useful and beyond dangerous for you. Years ago in my occupation as a Junin I came across a fierce competitor from the now destroyed Hot Springs village. This man used an unusual sort of summoning and after his defeat I came across his scroll." "Strange?" the blonde questioned. "Strange in the abilities it showed." The Hokage smiled at the genin. "Abilities you'll have to learn yourself. Summoning contracts are rare and valuable village resources. Konoha has the most at a total of 10 in mass circulation. In order to sign a contract one must go through a long and extensive process that isn't even available until you reach special Junin levels. Of course there are some special cases in which these things can be circumvented. This is one of those such cases. I can use this summon?" the blonde asked hopefully. The Hokage nodded. "Naruto, you can have the scroll if you can convince them to take you in. We've got a problem." The Hokage stopped mid-step and turned in the hallway to face his old student. "Jiraiya, you've returned already?" The Sannin didn't say anything, his face full of the serious sort of conviction that he only showed during the most dire of circumstances. The village leader noted this and turned to continue his journey to the office he hadn't visited in over a month. If the Sannin was here now this had to be important. He opened the door and stepped inside. A copy of him looking up in surprise. A nod and the person was replaced with an older-looking woman who rose from the seat. The Sannin quickly stepped through the door and leaned against it. "Are we clear?" "Yes," the elderly woman answered as she shot a look between them and stepped from behind the large desk. "What's going on?" "We apparently have a problem of grave importance," Sarutobi answered. "I'll leave it to you to relay it to Hamaru. Jiraiya? If you remember I said something not too long ago about checking up on Uchiha Itachi." The two village elders shared a look before nodding. "Then I sent a report noting a possible connection between him and Orochimaru." "Yes?" The old fire shadow's voice now stern. A nervous edge creeping up. What is it? I found that connection. And it's not good. The Sannin paused here and looked between the two. It appears that a few years back, before Orochimaru became leader of Sound, the two had been allies in an organization of some sort. A high-class organization. What sort of organization? The kind that spells bad news for not only Konoha but the entire ninja world. Apparently it was a group of 10 with a very specific membership requirement. You had to be a missing Nin's class and wanted for some kind of heinous crime around the shinobi world. The words seeping into their head. Even the Sannin, who was reporting it, taking note of it again. The bad kind of fuckers that you didn't want to mess with unless you had no other choice. Koharu frowned, worry showing in her eyes. This does not bode well. Any idea as to what they were doing? Oh yes, I have an idea. Jiraiya responded before taking a deep breath. Apparently they were focusing on kidnapping. Or more specifically grabbing a certain group of people. His eyes quickly darting to the large bay window and the monument on the mountain. The Jinchuriki. They're hunting them. Sarutobi could not help but draw in a large gulp of air in surprise. Disbelief written across his face. A reaction that was matched by his old teammate. For what I don't know. Jiraiya continued, but it can be safe to say it's not good. And from what I gathered Orochimaru rebelled and went into hiding from them after he attempted to harvest Itachi's eyes. To which he was promptly beaten and tossed aside by our young mass murderer. Do you have any idea who else is included in the group? No. The Akatsuki, their name, is very closely guarded. And I had to hide this informant for fear of his safety. But he did give me one piece of information. A measure of how dangerous they can be. What is it? Dropping down into his seat. You remember the civil war in Kiri, correct? How can we not? Koharu replied as she chose one of the seats in front of the desk. The bloodline limit purges. Rather insane, the Hokage added, blaming all the bloodline clans for their problems in wars. I've got some really chilling info that the Akatsuki had something to do with it. Rumor was that the last Mizukage was the Sanbi Jinchuriki. And that after he was defeated it was unmasked that someone wearing a black cloak with red clouds had been using a jutsu to influence him for years. The calling card of the Akatsuki. A tense silence descended on the room. The old Hokage sighed heavily as he dropped into his chair and clasped his hands under his chin. Resting his head and weary eyes as he tried to maintain control of the wave of thoughts. He sat in the same chair that had been through so many of these situations before. Another crisis befalling his village. His home. We have to tell Naruto. Koharu frowned. What? We have to tell Naruto. He repeated as his eyes moved up to meet hers. Let him know of their presence and what they're after. Put him on alert for anything too suspicious. Is that wise? She protested. I just don't seem to believe Uzumaki can handle it. I agree with Sensei on this. Jiraiya stepped in. He'll find out sooner or later. But at least this way he'll have time to prepare himself. It involves him directly and in turn affects the village as a whole. He at the very least deserves to know. If only to keep his faith in the village. I suppose so. It makes perfect sense. Hiruzen continued. I'll leave it to you to tell him, Jiraiya. Understood. I was planning on seeking him out after this. Only 2 days left. Meanwhile we'll be working to make a contingency plan for defending the village. Koharu frowned even deeper. You expect them soon? No. Or at least I hope that isn't the case. Rather this is a precaution for the finals. The finals? The Sannin asked as he finally stepped away from the door. Do you anticipate something happening? The Hokage gave him a dull look. Do you honestly not? You know Orochimaru as well as I do. He wouldn't have come out of hiding just to mark young Sasuke. He wants something more out of all this. The only question is what? Out of all the Uchiha left in the village, why do you think he chose Sasuke? Because of his potential? His connection to Itachi? No. I believe the answer is far too visible to look that deep. Koharu nodded her head. For the simple fact that he has chosen the path of revenge. A heavy sigh escaping her. It would be easiest to tempt him with the promise of power. What he can't obtain easily here in Konoha. Of all the Uchiha left, Sasuke is the most emotionally and mentally unstable. Others might have dreams of revenge, but only he actively lets it rule his life. For that we have to keep a close eye on him. Especially considering his disposition towards Naruto. Seeing someone he previously disregarded improve so drastically in such a small amount of time could invoke him into a fit of rage. And then I could easily see him falling into Orochimaru's trap. Listening to the sweet whispers of power. It couldn't be something that we could put off though. Naruto needed the training, and this new development only makes it a more pressing matter. Hiruzen. Koharu began as she shot her old teammate a curious glance. Do you honestly believe Uzumaki has improved that much in such a short time? To be stronger than Sasuke? That isn't something I can say at this point without having an idea about how well Kakashi has trained him. With the Sharingan he has the potential for drastic improvement. But I do believe that Naruto has the ability to win this exam and show the skills necessary for Chunin promotion. To be honest, I was at a loss for how much potential Naruto showed himself. He shows a surprising grasp when words are put into the right terms. And his physical abilities were quite impressive to start. And the Kyuubi? Not a problem. Jiraiya interjected. Before we even began I put a seal on him to limit the Kyuubi's influence on him. I wanted to teach him how to manage his own power before delving into that of the fox demon. And at first it seemed like a good idea. We were working on nature manipulation when his Kekkei Genkai resurfaced. Nature manipulation? A genin? She asked skeptically. The Sannin shrugged. He was doing fairly well. Obviously I hadn't expected for him to gain complete control. But I wanted enough for him to manage higher level ninjutsu. I started with wind, being his primary nature, and figured with his massive chakra reserves he could use wind ninjutsu for mass area damage where he could not counter with inferior skill. Keep the Hyuga boy from using taijutsu. I continued on that base. Hiruzen added, realizing that they were now explaining Naruto's training. Earth and wind natures are around a good level. He still needs a lot of work if he ever wants to get to the elite level, but for now he's well beyond genin. It's more than a little unfair at how quickly he's progressed considering he's the only one capable of using the Kage Bushin technique to its full potential. Add to it his work with his Kekkei Tota, speed training, minor taijutsu adjustments, and summoning. He can summon? Jiraiya asked in real surprise, an expression that Koharu mirrored. What is it? I had hoped he would continue the tradition and summon toads. No, Sarutobi cut off as he shook his head. He would not accept that. For that I gave him another choice. Do you remember Koharu? The scroll we found as a young team? She frowned. Those strange violent beasts? They accepted him? The Hokage nodded. Indeed, I was reluctant at first and insisted on staying with him for safety reasons. But in the end he supposedly impressed them quite a bit. So it's safe to say he's more than ready for the exam? Indeed, which means we have, for the moment at least, one less problem to deal with. And with that in mind we have to make a move now. Jiraiya, I'll be counting on you to watch over Naruto from here on out. Make sure he's prepared for this Akatsuki. Alright, Jiraiya nodded. And as for Orochimaru, don't worry about that. Hiruzen cut in. We'll be handling that. All I ask is that if something were to happen you would protect the village and its occupants if I am predisposed with something else. Are you sure? I could. No, just what I've asked. Giving his old student a slight smile. I don't want to worry you any more than I have. The Sannin frowned but gave in and turned to open the door. Alright, I'll be on my way then. Check on the kid before the exam. Very well. Goodbye Jiraiya. See ya sensei. The Hokage waited until he was sure his old student was gone before turning to the other occupant of the room. Now then, I'll need you and Hamaru. Stage 2. A shift in perception. The air was full of excitement and the village was abuzz. Travelers from far and wide had marched upon the village hidden by the leaves in anticipation of this one day. The final round of the Chunin exams were set to start that afternoon and everyone who was anyone were prepared to attend. Around the village a festival had started and the people congregated together in groups by the thousand. Various bets were made on the outcome of the exams and nobles from various settlements came in droves to be wined and dined as they took the chance to check out the young future of the various shinobi villages. Away from this all Naruto sat alone at his favorite ramen stand. His eyes traced the crowd of people before turned in his seat to face his ramen. This was the day he had been waiting for. The day he had busted his ass to get to. The day where he would really begin his journey. Today he would make sure the village knew his name. And then the whole world. His eyes glanced up to two of the few people in the entire village that had gained his respect. The sight of his favorite ramen spot filled to the brim with customers brought a now rare genuine smile to his face. They had always shown him kindness despite the trouble it caused them. But that would all change now. No point hanging around here any longer. Naruto thought as he looked around the crowded area. These people have come for a show after all. With a wave of his hand he signaled the ramen stand server. Thanks for the meal Ayame. He called as he set down a stack of ryo that far exceeded the amount necessary before he slipped another piece of paper on top of that. 100-to-1 odds. He thought as he began to walk away from the stand. That'll put them in a great position. And with that done the blonde made his way to the newly built Coliseum. The roaring crowd was more than he expected. Far more. Thousands upon thousands of civilians, shinobi, and prospective clients had already packed the stands in preparation for what was to come. It was a sea of people so great the blonde didn't even bother to make a guess as to how many of them there were. Over the break the Hokage had chosen to delve deeper into the meaning of the Chunin exam. He expanded on how its purpose of promoting unity was important but overall simply a front. Clients used their battles to measure the worth of the next generation and to decide where to put their stock for the future. Poor showings could mean the difference between a boom or a bust for each ninja's respective villages. Something that apparently Suna had already been feeling. It was because of this the children of the case cage were even allowed to compete in the first place. As the first family of the village hidden in the sand they were to represent that despite falling on hard times the village still had more than enough talent at its highest levels. Or at least that had been the idea. The fact that the only 3 sand ninja who attended the exam had all made it to the final round would help to validate that claim. At least until they were knocked out by the home crowd that was. Hey Naruto, what's with the new get-up? Naruto glanced down the line to his right where the young heir of the Naruto clan looked over him. The blonde frowned but didn't give anything else in return. He was unsure of how he felt concerning his fellow Leaf Genin. Unlike most they had known him from the time spent in the academy together. And did nothing more but antagonize him. The more he thought on the subject the more upset it made him. He had always been subjected to unfair treatment by those around him and had largely gotten used to it. But still it annoyed him to have all of his attempts at friendship rebuffed or mocked. And now the other Leaf Genin wanted to act like they were great friends? Naruto gave no verbal reply and instead faced the crowd ahead of them once again with full intent to ignore the question. His Genin teammate was missing and the young ninja briefly wondered if it was the work of his former Junin sensei. Not that it would surprise him any. Kakashi and Sasuke were made for one another. The Nara clan heir shook his head at the rude dismissal and gave the blonde Genin another look over. He now wore a pair of loose-fitting black pants with 2 small orange stripes running down the side while using his Hiat-8 as a belt with its black cloth. Strapped to both legs the blonde wore the usual shinobi pouch with a stock of kunai for the left and shuriken for the right. A black vest zipped up to the middle of his chest covered a short-sleeve orange shirt that just managed to reach down to his biceps. Bandages had been wrapped from just below the elbow up to the tips of his digits and fingerless gloves covering each hand while the metal plating below the knuckles protected the back. His hair had grown somewhat and now the bangs fell into his eyes and obscured them just enough. And to top that all off for some reason the blonde had taken to wearing a bright and obnoxious colored orange cloak to cover it all. That aside he looked like an actual shinobi now. Or at least as much as one who was obsessed with the color orange could be. Still, if the blonde Genin thought the change in uniform would help him in his fight against the Hyuga prodigy he would be in for a rude awakening. Maybe getting his face punched in again will finally teach him some respect. The Nara heir thought briefly before he snorted. Unlikely. All except for Uzumaki Naruto and Hyuga Neji need to leave the staging ground. The examiner proclaimed. Naruto briefly noticed it was a completely different man than it had originally been but didn't think anything of it as the genin around him walked away. Follow me Uzumaki. The genin followed the proctor as he led him a considerable distance away from his still opponent before he allowed him to turn back around. The 2 genin faced each other as the examiner addressed the crowd around them who roared in anticipation. Everyone liked a good fight. Especially ninja fights. The Hyuga prodigy faced his younger opponent with the superior smirk he always sported. He looked over the smaller genin before he snorted. You can forget now and save yourself some humiliation. The blonde genin frowned and made to open his mouth to reply before he stopped himself. He was letting his opponent get under his skin already. The Hokage had warned him of that, and if he let himself fall victim to his enemy's taunts, he had already lost the battle between the minds. His lack of response did not seem to bother the young Hyuga though, and if possible the smirk seemed to grow brooder. Good. He spoke again. You have complete confidence in your skills. It'll make crushing you all the more sweeter. Again he only received silence. The silence that spanned the distance between the two could be cut with a knife. The exam proctor, chewing on this senbon, looked between the two young shinobi. Eyes glancing from the favored to the underdog. Despite everything he had been told about the two competitors up to this point, he could not shake the feeling that this was going to be a battle that would be talked about for a long time in the village. Around them the crowd roared, anxious for the first fight. He raised a single hand high into the air and held it with palm open. Are both of you ready? The Hyuga nodded. The rookie genin nodded. He swiped his right hand through the air. Hajime. The first improvement the Hyuga prodigy noted was the increase in overall speed. By the time the proctor had finished moving his arm, the blonde was in motion. One quick hop back to increase the distance was followed by the right hand reaching down and flicking free 5 shuriken. Then half a second later the two hands had together and the 5 metal stars had become 50. The Hyuga stiffened as the customary veins around the side of his face bulged open. He bit his lower lip as his Byakugan enhanced sight caught the glints of fire attached to the end of each metal star. Exploding tags. Shit. With his hand forced, the young shinobi evaded the incoming death trap the only surefire way he knew how. By spinning in a complete circle. Kaiten. Heavenly spin. The blonde narrowed his eyes in surprise as the dome of solid chakra took shape around his adversary. The shuriken exploded on contact and a great wave of fire so intense he could feel the flames prickling his skin blossomed open. The genin didn't waste any time in preparing his next move. A cross-shaped seal later and 2 shadow clones popped into existence around him before they darted off towards the dwindling cloud of smoke. A pair of shuriken cut them both down midway as the Hyuga genin ripped free of the devastation. He charged across the ground hard and fast as he sought to close the gap in order to attack the blonde in close quarters. His feet slid to a halt and kicked up dirt and gravel as the other leaf shinobi began to make a row of seals even faster than he had before. Sweden. Mizurapa. Water release. Water trumpet. The Hyuga prodigy pulled his body into a tight spin to the right to avoid the violent burst of water that ripped across the distance between them. He focused on his footwork and came to a stop facing his opponent again, only to jerk back as a wave of orange clouded his immediate vision. The older genin lashed out with a chakra-coated palm strike and struck nothing but air as the younger genin body flickered past his defense. The Hyuga prodigy gritted his teeth as he lashed his left foot out directly behind him and forced the blonde to evade by quickly turning his body to the side and slapping it away with a palm. Using the momentum, the Hyuga quickly turned to meet his younger adversary and lashed out a front quick that was blocked by a raised knee. Undeterred, 2 hands lashed forward towards the chest in what would be crushing blows only for strong blocks to deflect them at the inner forearm. The blonde dropped his knee and leaned forward to reach past the Hyuga's guard. The action was met with the prodigy quickly taking a step back before he realized he had been hand and hopped over the leg sweep the younger genin had set up. The blonde leaned forward onto his 2 hands before he lifted his lower body up and lashed out with a quick side kick that stopped the prodigy's drive short. Then he focused a burst of chakra down and out with enough force to launch him sideways into a roll. Standing quickly to face his opponent, he leaned and knocked away another chakra-infused blow with his right hand before he lashed out with a front kick from his right foot. The Hyuga prodigy evaded that with a nimble sidestep as he moved to the outside and jabbed at the limb with 2 fingers. The 2 genin became a flurry of strikes and blocks as they tried to land a solid blow. The crowd's combined voices rose into a frenzy as the young leaf ninja went at each other with all the ferocity of bitter enemies. To the people, it was an unexpected strong fight from what was supposed to be a quick encounter. The shinobi, however, saw something completely different. To them, 2 young ninja flashed skill that boggled the mind when they factored their age and experience. The seasoned veterans saw 2 young ninja whose hand-to-hand combat skills far outstripped anything more than 2/3 could have pulled off at the same stage in their own personal developments. It was the future spread out before them. That can't be Naruto. The Yamanaka clan heiress shouted as she looked down on the arena below them. Tell me that's not Naruto. Haruno Sakura opened her mouth to reply before she snapped it shut. Her body had gone still and her own eyes were open with shock as she stared down at the scene before her. She wanted to say something, anything really, but couldn't. Because despite the loyalty she wanted to show to her teammate, there was just no way that was Uzumaki Naruto. Tell me it isn't him. The blonde kunyachi had taken to gripping the metal railing in front of her to express her disbelief physically. That isn't Naruto. It is. The male beside her cut in roughly. That's him all right. Only he could stand to wear that much orange. Inazunka Kiba's voice was serious and out of character. In his lap the small puppy that served as his partner curled up as it watched the match along with its master. But how? The girl stressed. How the hell did Naruto of all people get so good? Oh, I don't know. The boy snarked sarcastically. Maybe by training? I know if I were given 2 months to work with and heard everyone counting me out, you best better believe I would do everything I could to show them wrong. The words were rough but truthful all the same. But what kind of training could turn someone so helpless into something so fierce? Haruno Sakura rationalized as she watched her teammate twist and twirl with the older genin. She could scarcely believe it herself, but here he was matching an older and more experienced opponent blow for blow. The short boy who was more brawler than ninja had managed to keep up with previous year's best rookie. A member of an honored clan who was known specifically for their skill in hand-to-hand combat. And this one was known as the most gifted they had. How in the hell was he doing this? The Hyuga prodigy felt the opening before it even came up. A feint with his right hand forced the blonde to guard. A mistake that the older genin capitalized. With a simple shift of his footing he reached out and further batted the arm apart. Inside his younger opponent's guard, Hyuga Neji snapped off 3 quick finger taps before he finally landed a fierce palm strike that sent the younger genin stumbling back. Without missing a beat, the white-eyed prodigy flashed forward before he rose up and launched a sidekick directly to his adversary's chest. The shorter genin flew back with wide eyes as he hit the ground with a thud and rolled back feet overhead. With his smirk back in place, the Hyuga quickly rushed forward again and followed after with the intent on ending the match. Only to stiffen in surprise as his combatant dispelled into a puff of smoke mid-roll. The blonde erupted from the ground with the force of a breaching whale. The long-haired genin slid to a stop and leaned back just enough so that the uppercut only snapped his teeth shut by brushing the edge of his chin. But off balance he was unable to stop the flowing kick that slammed into his stomach with far more force than anything that blonde had shown up to that point. The older leaf genin felt the air forced from his lungs as he was sent jolting backwards by the strike. He fell onto his back and slid for half a second before experience forced him to roll his body to the right in order to avoid the knee drop that landed where he had just been. Even with no air in his lungs, the Hyuga genin lashed out, turning his body sideways and throwing the quick kick that caught the turning blonde in his side. Naruto grunted as he hit the ground before he rolled with the momentum and forced his way onto his feet. Neji was on him the next second and the blonde retreated as he blocked the rough series of strikes the older genin leveled at him. Seeing no other way to put distance between them, the blonde took a gamble and turned his body to the right. He grunted as 2 strikes slammed into his shoulder as he skip-hopped to escape the onslaught. Though he could feel the area start to numb immediately, the maneuver paid off as it allowed him to pull free 3 shuriken to cover his tracks. The Hyuga prodigy juked to the side as the stars flashed toward him before he slammed to a stop as he looked up to see the younger genin crouched down before him with one hand on the ground. The two went still for nearly 10 seconds before the younger genin's face grew grave. "Before we continue," he said, "I want to ask you, what the fuck is your deal?" The branch family member blinked slightly in surprise before his brow furrowed. The veins surrounding his eyes pulsed with irritation as he processed the words. He grit his teeth and his right hand twitched in frustration. "My deal?" The words were hollow and dead. "You want to know what my deal is?" The blonde frowned. "Damn right I do. Why did you go off like that before? What has she ever done to you?" "Hyuga Hinata is a failure." The older genin cut in. "Right now, in their graves, our ancestors laugh at the idea alone that someone like her would take on the title of clan head." His white eyes pinned the younger genin to the spot. "A failure?" Naruto echoed in disbelief. Neji nodded as he calmly stood to full height and crossed his arms. "That is correct. She, who was born heiress to our clan, is routinely mocked. She is unsuitable for the life of a ninja and the horrors it can bring. She is shy to a fault and dislikes causing suffering of any kind. She doesn't have the will in her to strike down the clan's enemies. Naruto's mind flashed back to Wave Country and the kind young man who had spared Sasuke's life only to die himself. It was as the Hyuga prodigy said. Some people weren't made for the horrible nature of the ninja life. But even still, who was he to tell someone what they could and couldn't do? This was the kind of person that made him the most angry. The Hyuga clan is proud. The older genin continued. Our lineage goes back to the time even before the shinobi arts came about. We are warriors at our core and noble on our exterior. For generations we have been serving the Leaf Village proudly as members of its shinobi corps. And yet the next head of our family cannot even defeat her younger sister 4 years her junior? This is unacceptable in our eyes. And that gives you the right to belittle her? Naruto challenged as the crowd above them began to get restless with the stop in the action. That gives you the right to step on her dreams? The older genin scoffed. Dreams? Hyuga Hinata's dreams are just that. They aren't things that can be accomplished. She's the kind of person who wants peace for everyone in every little thing. She doesn't like conflict of any nature. Her dreams consist of us holding hands from Kumo to Kiri and singing about kindness and happiness. He chuckled darkly and gave a shake of his head. Those aren't dreams. Those are delusions. There is too much hatred and animosity between the people for what she desires. Even in this village there are grudges generations deep that can never be overcome. Something she can never understand. Something she refuses to even try and see. He took a deep breath and closed his eyes as he tried to rein in his temper. As for my deal, I have a personal vendetta that extends not only to my younger cousin but to all members of the main branch family. My deal is that I don't even have a choice in my own life. My deal is that my fate has already been sealed. The blonde narrowed his eyes in confusion. Your fate has been chosen for you? Indeed, Neji replied as he opened his eyes. And the fate of all other branch members. To live and die as slaves of the main branch due to the Juin Jutsu placed upon our foreheads. His hands had begun to rise up to his face. Naruto said nothing as the older genin reached back and untied his forehead protector. His eyes instantly zoned in onto the array displayed across his forehead. He had heard about this from the Hokage. About that the horrible treatment of the Hyuga clan branch members and the origins of said seal. With this seal on my forehead my fate is already written. I will die a slave to the main family as all branch members before me have. His face became twisted and his expression bitter. As my father did. Naruto raised an eyebrow as they came to the heart of the matter. Your father? Yes. My father, who was killed for the sake of the main branch. Sacrificed for a mistake he did not make. He took another deep breath to calm himself before he continued. Years ago, when I was still young, the Leaf Village held a festival designed around peace. And the honored guest was a diplomat from Kumo. A Junin. Naruto remembered that. He had been unable to go for fear of how the people would react. But he did remember that the Hokage had been too busy with the diplomat to see him. It was a farce. A lie so that Kumo could pull another underhanded tactic. Neji said. In truth the man was here for one thing only. To steal the Byakugan of the Hyuga clan. And as such he chose his target. Young Lady Hinata. As you can tell the attempt fell. In his rush to escape the kidnapper had been tracked down by our clan head, her father. But in his anger instead of capturing the man he killed him swiftly. A mistake that made for a political disaster. The blonde could already see where this was going and didn't like it. It was a deep-seated grudge that he admitted had some claim to it. Suddenly the older boy didn't seem as much of an asshole as he originally thought. Kumo of course denied any involvement and instead threatened with war. The only way to appease them was to give them the life of the man who had killed their diplomat. But that wasn't possible. The main family head could not be expected to take responsibility for his mistake. And so instead they sent a decoy in his place. His twin brother. My father. The words were said with a snarl that made it clear what he thought on the matter, and Naruto could not blame him. Because Hiyashi-sama could not control his temper, my father had to die. I hate that, but I do understand it. The genin's hands had become fist at that point. But to see my younger cousin acting this way? Weak, helpless, useless? I makes you feel as if your father's sacrifice was in vain. Naruto cut in quietly. Even so, the Hyuga prodigy seemed to have heard him. He shook his head again and caused his long hair to sway with the action. More than that, I've trained every day to make myself the kind of shinobi my father would be proud of. I've learned, despite the intent of the main branch to hide the resources from us, maneuvers like the heavenly spin on my own. I've mastered every challenge set my way. And yet no matter how far I get, I'll never get the respect I deserve. He's beyond angry, Naruto thought as he eyed his opponent. He's pissed, and I can't say I blame him. Once upon a time he would have stopped the older genin there and yelled things at him. Things like he was nothing more than a fool or selfish. He would have once declared something like he didn't believe in fate and would do everything in his power to change his perception as well. He would have made promises about the things he would have accomplished when he took on the mantle of Hokage. And that he would make sure that the branch Hyuga were free. Now, he just didn't care. I don't know, Neji continued as he reached up to his forehead protect her back. If the clan head, my uncle, even cares that my father died. I used to imagine that he did and felt a great amount of guilt for it. But then again, we'll never probably know. And instead every day I have to watch the person my father was sacrificed for fail again and again. He pulled the clothing tight before he slipped back down into his stance. That's what my deal is. What's going on down there? Haruno Sakura thought as she shifted over to another seat on her right to make room for the newest addition to their viewing group. It was more than a little surprising when Rock Lee had descended from the stairs and had asked for a seat. The fact that the genin was moving at all was beyond remarkable. The willpower needed to force his body to be here had to be staggering. Not that Sakura couldn't understand why he would push himself. Even she knew how significant it was for him to be here. Excuse me, the brown-haired girl who had helped him down the stairs had began to speak. But could you tell us what's going on right now? Sakura couldn't remember her name but knew her as the teammate of Lee and the Hyuga prodigy. Of course any answer she would have had didn't even make it to her lips before the blonde next to her leaned forward and began to give an avid recap. Sakura frowned as he moved her head out of the way of flying limbs. It was strange to say the least. One minute they were tangled in a complex series of taijutsu moves and the next they were calmly speaking to one another. She didn't know what to make of it. Naruto didn't usually do anything more but rush his opponent and try brute force. But then again he was doing a lot he didn't normally do. And then they broke apart before. The Yamanaka clan heiress trailed off with a frown. Before they started talking, the disbelief on the brown-haired Kunichi's face was amusing to say the least. I see, though she didn't believe it. Rock Lee on the other hand had a bright smile on his face as he looked down onto the arena below them. I knew Naruto-kun could do it. It felt a little wrong cheering against his teammate, but there was more than just squad pride on the line here. If anyone is a genius of hard work, it's him. His teammate frowned as she looked to him and started to say something before the boy at the far end from her spoke up. They're starting again. Naruto rolled his neck before he nodded his head. I can respect that, Dan. I was just a little curious. The older genin said nothing and simply stared back at him with bulging eyes. The blonde didn't take offense to this and simply took a deep breath knowing that the slight intermission was over. His curiosity had been indulged long enough. It was time to finish this. Here we go. Clapping his hands together, the blonde ran through a series of seals before he channeled chakra to the tips of his toes and pushed off. The Hyuga prodigy didn't even bother to match the charge. Instead he chose to widen his base and flood his right arm with chakra as he prepared to reveal one of his new techniques. Taking a deep breath, Neji dipped his hips further before he took a hard step forward with his left foot and threw his right arm out towards the charging Naruto. Hake Kusho. 8 Divination Sign Air Palm. Naruto blanched as the wave of chakra rushed towards him across the expanse between them. Unable to dodge in time, inspiration struck him. A seal-less shadow clone popped into existence beside him as he slid to a stop. It reached out and grabbed him by the shoulders before heaving him aside with all its might. The wave of chakra decimated the clone and Naruto winced mid-air as the memories rushed into his head. He righted himself and landed in a crouch, only to jerk back in surprise as the Hyuga prodigy entered his space via Shushin. The arrogant smirk was back as the Hyuga spread his arms wide and crouched down before him. You're in the range of my divination, he announced as his Byakugan took in the location of the blonde's tenketsu and 2 fingers extended from each fist. Shit, Hake Rokujuin Sho. 8. Divination signed 64 palms of the hand. 2. Neji shouted as 2 fingers slammed into the blonde. 4. Naruto snarled as the assault began in earnest. 8. 16. His hands only blurs the Hyuga prodigy turned his body to assault a different section of the body. 32. It was now that something occurred to him and the Hyuga prodigy realized that something was very wrong. 64. His furious attack continued as his arms became nothing more than blurs. He struck and pushed chakra at each of the points he saw before he realized that pain had begun to shoot back into his own arms. A startled gasp ripped free as his attack finished and he realized with his Byakugan enhanced sight that none of the tenketsu he had attacked had been closed. He finished by slamming a palm into the blonde's chest intent on launching him away only for him to realize that he had been hitting something solid the entire time. His gaze snapped up from the chest the younger Genin's eyes. Now the blonde held the arrogant smirk. "You're in the range of an ass whoppin'." What had followed next was a completely different experience for the Hyuga prodigy. The blonde slapped his hands together in a ram seal and his smirk widened. Neji watched in surprise as black markings suddenly spread across his skin before completely fading from view. He took the time to hop a few steps back for distance as he tried to figure out what had happened. He didn't get far. One shushin later and the blonde was in his space before he delivered a right swing that was far faster and far stronger than anything he had delivered before. Neji deflected the blow away with a slap of the opposite hand but was unable to react fast enough to avoid the follow-up knee to the side. He gasped as pain instantly began to spread from the point of origin before the right fist returned again and nailed him in the opposite side. Instincts hardened by training and experience began to kick in as he sought to escape the blonde's sudden assault. It was all for naught though as he took another right to the stomach and a snap kick to the same abused side. Staggering back, the Hyuga prodigy preformed the strongest body flicker he could manage as he moved to put distance between them. And it worked, or so he thought, up to the point where the blonde dropped to his knees instead of following and instead began to flick through hand seals faster than anything he had shown up to that point. Doden. Doryu Heki. Earth release. Earth-style wall. With his enhanced vision, Neji saw the large wall suddenly sprout up from ground behind him. Mid-shushin he barely had time to stop himself from going splat and paid the price when the chakra he had expelled in the opposite direction slammed back into his own body. He winced and closed his eyes for a brief second as he tried to stop all his momentum. More than enough time for Naruto to continue his work. 3 hand signs and a body flicker of his own later and the blonde had covered half the distance between them before he thrusted both his hands with open palms at his opponent. Byakugan active Neji saw the buildup of chakra seconds before the jutsu took effect. Fuuten. Repusho. Wind release. Gale wind palm. The jutsu covered the distance between them in a flash. Neji was uprooted from his feet and thrown back with tremendous force before he was slammed into the wall. His body seized up and the genin coughed up a wad of blood as his midsection was abused. He slid down to his knees and fell onto his hands as his world twisted around him and a throb of pain began in the back of his head. Through sheer willpower alone the Hyuga genin focused his vision enough to see what came next. The 3 shadow clones covered the remaining distance between them with more of the same surprising speed. The older genin forced his way to his feet as fast as he could and lashed out his left palm in an attempt to stop his attackers. It was a sloppy and useless gesture. The first clone that reached him slapped the hand down roughly as it flipped over him. Catching itself against the wall using chakra coating its hands, it launched a mule kick into his back that sent him sprawling back down and onto the ground. Half a second later the clone had leapt down and falling onto his back as the 2 others slid to a stop on either side and grabbed each of his arms. Frustrated Neji could do nothing as the 3 clones each drew a kunai and placed the tips near his naked jugular. There was no more struggle. The older genin with wide eyes deactivated his bloodline limit before his head fell over in shame. He had been beaten. In the academy, Naruto shouted from the distance between them. The clone jutsu was my worst skill. 3 times I failed because I was unable to do it. But instead of letting it dictate how I should live, I choose to keep on working. A smirk and a shake of his head. Now it's one of my best. Don't let anyone tell you what you can and do or what you can or can't be. He turned his attention to the awestruck examiner standing off to the side. Well, The Chunin looked between the two of them and shook his head as he scoffed in disbelief. With a hand raised to the sky he turned to the crowd around him and shouted the words the blonde had longed to hear. Winner, Uzumaki Naruto. The roar of pure emotion that followed was sweeter than any ramen could ever be. He won. Yamanaka Ino shouted in disbelief, her facial expressions matched. That idiot actually won. Haruno Sakura sat in equal disbelief as she looked down onto the arena floor below them. The abundance of noise around them keeping her thoughts from properly forming. Jaw dropped, she watched as the clones dispelled and the proctor lowered the wall of earth that had erupted from the ground. Her eyes traced her own teammate's form as he walked over to the obnoxious orange cloak and reclaimed it as Medic loaded his older opponent onto a stretcher to take away. What in the hell did she just watch? On her left side, the strangely dressed genin with crutches had gone wild with glee as his brown-haired companion stared dumbly at the battlefield while muttering something under her breath. To her opposite side, the brown-haired male genin had taken to simply shake his head with a smile as the puppy in his lap continued to yip and bark. Still, her brain refused to work. He won? Her happy-go-lucky helpless teammate won? Of course he did. That was what Naruto did. He overcame obstacles he had no business even trying to take down. He defeated enemies who he should have never even challenged. He won. A smile split her face as the fact seemed to take root. He had won. And for today that was more than enough. Way to go, Naruto. A hard sigh slid past chapped lips. The obnoxious orange cloak that had been slung over his forearm had now been dropped onto the stone flooring. Naruto closed his eyes and took a deep breath in an attempt to calm his furiously beating heart. Slumping against the wall and leaning his head back, the rough texture of the concrete did not really cause discomfort for him. If anything, the cool stone was a welcomed contradiction to the heat of the sun that had touched the back of his neck. Quite an impressive showing out there, kid. Naruto grinned but did not open his eyes. Instead, he simply rolled his head sideways and rested his cheek against the concrete wall as he faced his head towards the man. Jiraiya began to descend the steps from the first landing towards the ground floor. His eyes focusing on the boy who stood against the wall. A small bead of surprise gleaming in his eyes. I had no idea that someone could learn so many techniques in such a short amount of time. Only a month and a half after all. Naruto shrugged as he rolled his head back to the proper alignment. We cheated. Jiraiya stopped 3 steps from the boy's position. A frown of confusion lighting up his face as he regarded the genin before him. Cheated? He was forced to ask. How? My seals? Growth hormones. Naruto replied with another sigh as he raised his arms above his head and stretched. Proteins and the like. Also used my chakra to forcefully rebuild my muscles overnight to help recover from physical exertion. It's a counter to your seals that seemed to work rather well. He grinned. To be honest, we didn't come up with. He just noticed my muscle tone was seemingly getting larger by the day. I was always fresh for the next session, and so we put 2 and 2 together and got the Kyuubi. Jiraiya nodded, impressed but still confused. Isn't that a little dangerous though? The Sannin inquired. My seals draining your chakra, then this drains your chakra, and your training. You would be wiped out every night. If I was a normal person. Naruto disagreed. But I'm far from that. But I do sleep rather soundly at night. Still, with your exposure to the Kyuubi's chakra reserves rather limited right now. Don't worry, Naruto reassured. It was a one-time thing due to the time restrictions. I won't need it anymore. From here on out I'll grow physically on my own power. Ah, good to hear. And the ninjutsu? Shadow clones. Naruto explained to him. That took up the largest bulk of my chakra daily, to tell the truth. About 20 clones a day split up to working on 2 ninjutsu. Of course none of them are nowhere near the level of being mastered, but I'm farther along than most my age would be. First I got to an above average level of chakra element manipulation. First half of my main 3 really, and that helped out to learn the ninjutsu. From there it was just repetitive work to get it battle ready. To be honest, most of my time away from you was spent working on fixing my taijutsu and learning to keep track of faster opponents. That's how I was able to easily counter what he was doing when forced into taijutsu encounters. Your little seal trick also helped me to keep up physically and helped my speed and strength. All of this along with summoning technique you learned? This time Naruto did open his eyes, rolling his head back around to look at the Sannin. A raised eyebrow. You know about that? Yep. A grin of his own popping up. Trying to keep it a secret? I was. Naruto admitted. After all, it was you who forced the idea of keeping a few things out of the eye of the public. Of course I did, nodding as if he was wise with chest puffed out. A famous ninja is a soon-to-be-dead ninja. People purposely develop counters for it. Like the Hyuga boy did for your shadow clone usage. Pretty nice no seal use by the way. Mostly only Junin can pull that off. You've come a long way in a short time, shortcuts or not. What can I say? I had good teachers. Of course. Jiraiya agreed. Which reminds me, I'll be taking over your training after the tournament. Official transfer to me and all from Team 7. Good. Was going to ask anyway. A shake of his head. Can't deal with that drama holding me back anymore. You hear that now? Referring to the rowdy crowd back out on the field. What are the odds his match will be postponed for him where it wouldn't be for anyone else? Of course, what the people want they get on this particular occasion, despite if it's fair or not. And everyone was here to see the last Uchiha. The case cage especially. He paused here and looked back down the long hallway towards the slim light from the sun. Which reminds me of something. Sensei told me to warn you to be on the lookout for anything suspicious involving Sand Ninja. Naruto frowned as he finally stood up from the wall. He did? Is something going to happen? Jiraiya shrugged. Don't know for sure, but I know he's got the Anbu and all Junin level ninja on high alert. You're the only one under Chunin level he wants to let in on this. So just be ready for anything. And stick around the arena area. Naruto blinked in surprise, honored that he was being let in on this. I'll do that. Does he expect something to come of it? Again, don't know for sure. But he did say for you specifically to watch after the Sand Jinchuriki. Another pause as something occurred to him. By the way, how is your Kekkei Genkai work coming along? Did you work on what I was talking about before? Naruto frowned but nodded. In what time I did before I turned in each night. How far along are you with those ninjutsu? Jiraiya asked, suddenly serious. So much so Naruto was slightly taken aback by the quick change of tension. I've got that little kunai and shuriken trick down well enough, but I need something to do it with. Naruto answered. And I'm sure I can recreate a defensive wall ninjutsu with it if I absolutely had to. I've also got one little technique I can use to supplement my taijutsu in defense. He grinned again. Should have seen the look on his face when he realized he wasn't actually getting through. Shattered the defense with a pure chakra strike, but it did its job enough to keep me from harm. How about changing physical matter? The Sannin pressed on. I've done a little work with water. It's the same as with the technique. I can do it but would rather not have to. But I'm sure I can in a dire circumstance. A grin appeared. I'm pretty good under pressure. Jiraiya grinned as well, another quick change in demeanor. So I've noticed. A sigh of his own filling the air between them. Anyhow, I've got something to check on. Remember to be ready for anything. As he began to turn around. Will do. Giving a half wave, Jiraiya began to climb the steps. What about you? Don't worry about me, kid. Just be ready. He threw back over his shoulder. Naruto shook his head as he reached down and grabbed his cloak. Right, be ready. For what though? Stage 3. Assault on the Leaf Village. He isn't coming. Inazunka Kiba announced with a grin as he leaned back in his chair and crossed his hands behind his head. Sakura turned around in her seat, now one level down from him, and frowned but said nothing to the contrary. Also thinking the same thing at this point. It wasn't like Sasuke to be late. I wonder where he is. Yamanaka Ino muttered from beside her as she looked over the guard railing before them and onto the field below. They had taken the chance to move up when a group from Wind Country had gone for refreshments but hadn't come back. He wouldn't miss this unless he had no choice. Do you think something's wrong? You mean with his ego? Kiba continued, amusement evident in his voice. Nope, just grew even bigger if possible. Kiba, Sakura began to admonish before something caught her attention. Her face suddenly brightening up. Naruto, over here. Kiba, and many of the other fans seated around them, turned around towards the top of the stairs. Lo and behold, there stood the before-mentioned blonde. Looking down at them from his casual position leaning against the back wall to that level of seating. Sakura stood up in her seat and waved at her teammate with a smile. Down here. The blonde moved his eyes to her solely and regarded her with a look before he finally seemed to submit and leaned away from the wall. Walking slowly down the steps towards their position at the bottom row on this seating level. He ignored the looks of either venom or surprise as he walked along the way. finally reaching their level where he looked quickly over the group. Most of them were from his school group with the exception of two who he knew had been on Neji's team. The female of the two stared at him with something he couldn't identify but didn't seem hostile. Sakura. He began with a slight smile. Slightly surprised at himself for his lack of an enthusiastic opening. How have you been? Great. Come sit down. Looking so much more relieved than he had originally expected. He raised an eyebrow at the over-the-top reaction but did indeed sit on the farthest seat of the row. Turning his glance down to the field below them where the examiner was announcing the changes in the schedule. I was right. More favoritism. So Sasuke hasn't shown yet? He commented casually. That actually doesn't surprise me. Sakura's excitement diminished some at his words. But still she could do nothing but shake her head in disappointment. No. Naruto turned his attention back to her and noted her displeasure at being reminded but said nothing to take it back. Instead he chose to focus more on the other faces surrounding them. Hinata, Kiba, Ino, Lee, the girl he didn't know and Choji. Shikamaru and Shino was most likely in the prepping room. It looked as if everyone were accounted for. Good, if anything did happen he would have everyone accounted for beforehand. Who's next then? Naruto questioned to the group in general. If they're going to postpone Sasuke's match. Shino is supposed to fight that doll guy from Sand. Kiba replied. But I think he quit out even before your match. Which in turn leaves Shikamaru against the girl with that other guy dead. Naruto concluded. A frown spread across his face. And he probably won't be up to fighting either. Which means it's right back again to Sasuke and Gaara. That is correct. Naruto started slightly but turned his head calmly back to the stairs. Two up from Kiba's row, a man with black hair and a slight scar over his left eye looked to him specifically. He appeared to be sizing Naruto up. Which put him on edge. The man was obviously a ninja from their village even if his clothing and lack of marking didn't show anything. It all goes back to young Sasuke holding things up. Something that is most displeasing. The man continued as he looked over the group of genin before focusing back on the blonde boy. But that isn't why I've come here. A pause as he locked eyes with Naruto. Uzumaki-san, I represent my clan who has wished to have a quick conversation with you. If you would, clan? A flicker of recognition slid up. The man's clothing and more importantly his physical features. Dark hair and dark eyes. This man was one of the remaining Uchiha. And judging by his age, only 20 or so, he too had been a young when Uchiha Itachi had made his move and thus had been spared by the madman. But why would he be looking for him? Despite the sudden sense of nervous tension around the group, Naruto rose up from his seat and tied his cloak around his neck before nodding to the man. The Uchiha promptly took to turning around and walking back up the flight of stairs. Naruto shot the group a reassuring smile before he followed after the man. Let's see what this is all about. Haruki. The aged samurai turned his head to the side where the daimyo of Fire Country sat. The country leader with his long black hair watched as the crowd outside of the press box began to argue angrily about the hold-up in the matches. The Chunin exams had always been some of his favorite events, but even he could not concentrate fully. Other things on his mind at this point. That was him. It had not been a question but a statement. Haruki, dressed in his traditional samurai armor and with katana strapped to his side, nodded his head. Yes, the fox demon container. Minato's child. The daimyo continued on, his eyes glancing the left side of the stands where the boy had exited the field in hopes of finding a flash of telltale orange. Indeed, sir. It had always been considered a tragic story in private settings around the palace. The long-lost child of the firstborn son. Or rather, instead of long lost, it was more of the unwanted child. Everyone there knew the boy was in Konoha. But they did not know why he was kept there instead of with his family. They did not know of the burden he bore and his unrecognized parentage. Haruki himself had many a times wondered what the boy had been like if he had indeed managed to survive the onslaught of negativity that the village was sure to throw at him. Obviously he was doing more than just fine on his own. A strong child indeed, just like his father had been. He has grown up in an interesting way. The daimyo continued. I've heard rumors about his attitude. The trouble he gets in too. Yet Sarutobi assured me in our meeting some weeks ago that he knew of the burden he bore. Tell me how someone can seem so happy and cheerful despite having everything against him. Haruki shrugged. I don't know, my lord. I myself would have went insane a long time ago. But ninja are masters of deception. Perhaps it is simply just a facade to hide his pain. A brilliant one at that. I wonder if he knows about his heritage. I assume he would. Haruki answered. I doubt Sarutobi would keep that sort of thing from him. The real question here was how he felt about it. The daimyo seemed to concur with this line of thinking. His memories pulled up the image of his young nephew who seemed to have passed on his unusual bright blonde hair, his son. This was all he had of his family now. I wished to meet him after the exam. It was finally time. For too long he had put it off. Make it so for me. Haruki bowed. Certainly, my lord. The luxury boxes of the stadium were indeed something to behold. Closed off completely from those around them save for the small opening between the room and the floor that served as the viewing window. Naruto stepped into the room and began to glance around. 3 people. 2 adult and 1 teen. Along with 2 Anbu guards standing outside the door who had no doubt been visible for extra security. The man who had led him in took a seat near the opening in the wall as the crowd began to suddenly roar. A quick glance outside before he nodded to the women seated next to him. Sasuke has arrived. The woman didn't say anything but instead nodded before turning her attention onto Naruto. He stood still despite the nervous energy that was running through him. Naruto didn't do nervous very well. It made him twitchy. Twitchy Naruto was bad Naruto. Clumsy Naruto. So you are Sasuke's teammate? The woman finally spoke. She was dressed in a rather fine kimono and had her black hair rolled up in a bun. Despite her delicate appearance, Naruto could feel the nervous energy she projected as current clan leader. No doubt she had simply been found to be next up after the massacre. Sasuke would probably be the rightful heir. Yes, he's my teammate, Naruto replied quietly as he tried to focus his attention away from the sounds outside. His eyes locked onto the woman's. Now that he had the chance to look more onto her, he could tell she was a civilian. That made him think about just how many ninja the Uchiha clan had left. The man was obviously one. And the other girl? A quick glance over to her. She was indeed wearing the proper gear and a Chunin vest. Also a ninja. But Sasuke made it seem as there weren't even this many Uchiha left. Let alone those serving as village ninja. He has spoken of you several times before. She continued, her voice light. He seems to hold you in high regard. As if on cue, another loud roar from the crowd rang out. No doubt the home favorite was doing okay. This was an honest surprise. Naruto's face went blank as he blinked. Sasuke thought of him as a rival? Sure, he had said that to the Uchiha boy many a time before. He still never thought that the idea would be shared between the two of them. To think Sasuke had always considered him a benchmark. But why was the real question. I wanted to ask you if you knew where he would be. But that seems useless now. Considering who your Junin sensei is, I can see why he was so delayed in getting here. It's a good thing they allowed for extra time though. It would reflect badly on the clan if our future leader didn't even turn up to the finals of his very first Chunin exams. And that is something we can't afford to have right now. Naruto remained silent as he stood unsure of what to say. He could understand her point though. With that said, I must admit I find you very interesting, Uzumaki-san. Sasuke made sure to note you several times as a ninja with very little real skill despite an obvious amount of potential. And yet you certainly didn't show little skill in that match of yours. Curious. But that is a situation for another time. I'm sure you'd rather be with your last teammate on cheering on Sasuke at this moment. As if to reinforce her point, the entire crowd outside took a stunned gasp as a collective. Yes, ma'am, Naruto answered truthfully. The situation was very unnerving for him and he would indeed much rather be down watching Sasuke's match if for no other reason than to scout both of his possible opponents for the next round of fighting. Then I suppose I should let you go. But we will meet again, Genin Uzumaki. Her words were a promise instead of a suggestion. Again Naruto chose the smart thing and stayed quiet. Go on then, I'm sorry for wasting your time. Naruto bowed at the waist before he turned and exited the room as one of the Anbu guards held the door open. Slowly releasing a pent-up sigh once he had been a safe distance away. That had been far harder than he thought it would be, but in the end it was nothing that he couldn't handle. Still, it would probably be a good idea to have Jiraiya teach him a little bit about politics. He blinked. Feathers? What was with the feathers? Crap, Genjutsu. In all honesty, as foolish as it sounded, Sakura had forgotten just how famous her Junin sensei was. The mission to the Wave Village had been well over a half a year ago now. And before that she had simply seen the masked ninja as a competent if lazy shinobi. And despite the level of combat he had shown on the way to the now legendary bridge, she had again began to see the man as a lazy but skilled shinobi. Gone was the awe that had resounded through her bones as the A-ranked Nuke Nin spoke of her teacher in such a respectful manner. But she was quickly reminded of just who the copy ninja was. The genjutsu had been overcame and she shook her head as she rose from her seat. The world all around her already in chaos as hidden ninja from both sides began to clash amongst the civilians. Beside her Ino and Choji had been knocked unconscious with Kiba and Hinata were nowhere in sight having walked away from the seat several minutes before. Lee and his teammate had also been sent under and Shikamaru had simply fallen where he had been coming down the stairs to greet them. Her breath hitched in her throat as Asuna Chunin suddenly appeared before her with hand already in mid-kunai swipe. Kakashi came through the air like a hawk with a meal in sight, his speed far outclassing even her chance to breath. The Chunin had slipped back down and over the railing and onto the stands below with a slit throat. Kakashi twirled the kunai along his right index finger before stopping it in a stabbing grip. His one eye quickly scanning the area behind her before it locked onto hers. The hard look in his eye was an even greater reminder of the kind of shinobi her sensei really was. A killer through and through who had made his name in a time during war. This was not chaos to him. It was a day at the beach. "Sakura, where's Naruto?" His voice was tight and controlled despite the seriousness of the situation around them. She swallowed hard and forced her eyes away from the carnage and mayhem around them. Instead focusing on her Junin sensei and struggled to find her voice. "I don't know." To even her own surprise a hand darted down and removed a single kunai from the pouch strapped to her thigh before it began to hold it steady in what had just a second earlier been a shaking left hand. "A member of the Uchiha clan came about 5 minutes before you got here. I think they wanted to ask him where you and Sasuke were." This obviously was not the answer her teacher wanted to hear. His brow creased and his mask tightened around the lower half of his face. Displeasure clearly written in his lone eye's gaze. Sakura forced herself to ignore Guy's shouts of dynamic power and focus her attention on the task at hand. What should she do? It came to her and she began to move again before she could stop herself. She leaned over to the side and focused her flow of chakra into her friend's body. Ino's eyes slowly fluttered open as the girl had already moved on to the next genin. Kakashi watched this with half attention as his mind began to race. Sakura? The Yamanaka heiress began before her mind caught up with the situation. She nearly squeaked in surprise but quickly rose to her feet. "What's going on? Sand and sound are attacking us." The pink-haired girl answered as she moved to Choji. Again surprised by how calm she sounded. Even amongst the chaos around her she managed to keep a cool head. "It's what Sasuke and Naruto would have done. Help me to wake the others." "Damn it." Kakashi's sudden outburst stopped her hand short of the round genin. Her eye's head snapping around as her eyes darted towards where his head was pointed. A sinking feeling forming in the pit of her stomach as she watched her crush rush after the trio of sand genin through a hole in the arena wall. "This is not good. Not good at all. Sensei." She began before she could stop herself short. "Where is Sasuke-kun going?" "To his death," the Junin replied grimly as he tightened his grip on his kunai. "Sabuka no Gara is. This isn't good. He was no doubt the Sand's trump card in this little operation. And now he's run off to regain control of his mental prowess. If he comes back it's going to mean bad news for us. But there's nothing to be done now. And Sasuke will be fighting 3-on-1. Not to mention I have no idea if Naruto is dead or not." "He's not dead." Sakura found herself blurting out as Ino took over for her and reawakened her teammate. "I saw Naruto before Sensei. During the exam." She swallowed as she stood back to full height and gave her Junin sensei a look of determination that she was not even sure she could make. "Naruto has always been an idiot. But he's always been able to take care of himself. And he's gotten good. Really, really good. He beat that Neji guy with only a little trouble. I know he's around here somewhere fighting." Kakashi seemed to take these words to heart despite the ever-growing frown on his face. In a flash of hand movement the Junin used the tip of his kunai to prick his finger and formed a few hand seals before he slammed his hand onto the ground. In a puff of smoke a small dog appeared complete with a little hite. It would have been rather cute if the situation had not been so dire. It shook its little head before turning its attention back to the Junin. Yo Kakashi. It glanced around before its maw made what looked like a frown. You piss someone off or something? What's with all the fighting going on around here? Suna and Otto are attacking us, Pakun. I need you to take Sakura, Ten, and Shikamaru after Sasuke. I'll find Naruto and send him after you as soon as I can. Can you do that? The little pug suddenly became serious and raised its paw in a salute. Can do. It turned its body around and looked to Sakura and the now busted Shikamaru, who grumbled as he rose off the ground. Come on kids, we don't have all day. Follow me unless you want to stay here and die. The two genin exchanged quick glances before nodding their consent. The little dog began to scurry away, hopping on the railing and running off with the two genin in tow. Kakashi watched them go for a moment before he turned his attention back to the last two genin capable of movement. Come on, he ordered to them. We have to find Naruto. It was unnaturally surreal in its nature. He had been up against overwhelming odds before and had refused to back down. He had chosen to stand where most others would have rather cowered in fear. But still, each time for his brave speeches and bold declarations, the panic that had run through his body was a constant reminder that he could die at any moment. That he would die at any moment for even being out there. This was nothing like that. For as many more experienced and high-level enemy ninja that assault the arena, he could not bring himself to feel any panic. Instead, an unnatural sort of calm seemed to descend over him. And as he slipped past punches, ducked kunai, and dodged ninjutsu, the words of the old Hokage brought themselves back to the forefront. It's not always the shinobi with the fastest hands or even the biggest brain that wins the battle. But rather, in my experience, I find it the one with the greatest will and the most experience that wins. And when you add to the fact that you have the devil's luck like you, my boy. Indeed, Lady Luck had somewhere along the way willingly become Naruto's bitch. And it showed now more than ever. He may not have nearly been in as many battles as these other shinobi have been. But he for sure at least been in more outmatched battles. Battles where he should have died a long time ago but still found a way to preserve. Being on the lower end of the scale had become sort of a constant to him. But now that he had some actual skill to go along with his luck. God-damned brat, he would more than make do. Naruto spun around as the Suna Chunin descended onto him. The man had launched himself into the air with a kunai extended for the kill, aiming for the throat. But to Naruto's eyes, he moved like a snail through water. Naruto had seen the likes of Momochi Zabuza and Hitaki Kakashi battle on the waves of the sea. He had seen the awe-inspiring speed of the legendary Snake Sanin as he ran circles around everything they threw at him. He had seen the pure brute power of Rock Lee's celestial gates. He had seen an incredibly long list of ninjutsu from the old toad pervert. And most importantly, he had seen the technical mind and jutsu combinations of the man who had once been regarded as the professor of shinobi. Compared to those feats and ninja, anyone that stepped up to kill him was nothing more than a nuisance, despite how much skill and experience they had at their disposal. The blonde stepped forward and grasped the man's bicep as he fell, turning and launching the man over his shoulder. His hands moving in ways that they had never before as they reached down and whipped free one shuriken each. The two ninja stars hit dead on, one in the head and the other in the chest. He was dead before he had even finished hitting the round. Naruto didn't even care to look though. This was the third one he had killed. And most surely wouldn't be the last. He knew luck had more than something to do with the fact that he hadn't come up against any major threat like an enemy Junin. But he was not one to complain in this situation. He simply focused on trying to stay alive and help as best as he could. Like a well-practiced ballroom dance, the boy flashed forward into a myriad of movement. Adrenaline and confidence propelling him in ways that he had never even dreamed of reaching in actual combat. A kunai in each hand as he dipped low past one of his fallen comrades. He was on the sound ninja before he could even comprehend he had defeated his first opponent. Right hand firmly grasping the kunai by the handle and jabbing it forward. The sharp iron easily slid through the muscle tissue in the front of the throat. Always aim high. That's what Jiraiya had taught him. A short tug pulled the knife free before the man even began to reach for the wound. And in the nick of time, as he pushed it with the tips of his sandals and propelled himself in a hop backwards and out of the path of three shuriken. He stuck his right foot back and pivoted his body in that direction. The next sound ninja was barreling down on his with right arm outstretched, a gauntlet like Dosu had worn attached to the forearm. The blonde had already seen this movie before and wasn't in the mood for reruns. He bent his knees and kicked forward in one swift movement, the speed catching even him shortly by surprise as he slammed his two knives forward, hitting home in the man's rib cage before he could even begin to swing his arm. They fell in a heap with Naruto leaning over him. Another tug and both knives pulled free of the bone and blood. He was stepping onto his feet again and moving on to the next one before the man could even begin to cough up blood. And so it continued like this for a while. No ninjutsu and very little taijutsu. He ducked, bobbed, weaved, hopped, slid, juked, and sidestepped around everything they sent at him. Calm and collected, giving way eventually to fierce and calculated. Although he could not see it, his eyes had taken on hard edge as they narrowed to see past each attack. A few had managed glancing blows on him, one sound attack even getting to him. He stumbled along but kept his footing, dashing to the side to dodge the follow-up. He cut that man's throat too. It wasn't long before the body count began to pile up. 5, 6, 8, 12. He was a possessed man, a demon of the battlefield. And the sand ninja began to notice. And the sound ninja began to notice. And the leaf ninja began to notice. Hake Kusho. 8 divination signs air palm. He finally stopped moving and crouched low as he let one of his kunai finally go. Embedded in the back of one ninja's head, his eyes darted to the left and then the right. Hyuga Neji had apparently joined the fight on his left. Another Hyuga, a man, to his right. He exchanged brief glances with both of them before his eyes moved to another downed body. A sand ninja weakly squirming. Apparently the Hyuga genin had held back on the strength of that technique during their match-up. Uzumaki. Came the curt greeting as the Hyuga prodigy took a step backwards with arms up. Hyuga. Naruto returned to both the elder and younger. He stood to his feet and replaced the last kunai into the pouch at his side, noting for the first time the amount of blood caked onto his hand and cloak. Still he ignored it. The time for disgust would come later. Right now they had developed a little crowd. About 7 sand and 4 sounds surrounding them, each looking to avenge a comrade. 3, 2, 1, 0. Kaden. Dai Enden. Fire release, great fireball. The large fireball caught even the 3-leaf ninja off guard. It rolled past them and over those in their vision. About 8 of the ninja were roasted alive. Screens of tournament even finally enough to make Naruto flinch in response. Before the last few could move they were also dead. 3 shuriken perfectly passed between the eyes of each of them. The 3-leaf ninja watched this all occur. Dumbfounded. Yo Gaki. They turned as one to their backside. Naruto blinking in surprise at the sight of the overgrown orange toad. It croaked loudly as the Sannin jumped down. A no-nonsense expression on his face despite the cheerful greeting. Come with me, kid. We're going into the village to do work. The blonde genin looked surprised by the claim but nodded his understanding. Taking a step forward before he nodded his head to either Hyuga before he leapt onto the toad. Jiraiya joined him and gave both ninja mock salute before the toad suddenly jumped off. With both master and pupil in towed, Hitaki Kakashi scowled as he took a single step back to avoid his charging opponent. Behind him the 2 genin of Team 10 stood with wide eyes and sweating palms as they each tightly clutched a kunai. They watched as the Junin sensei of Team 7 calmly evaded his newest challenger before a simple academy bushin allowed him to slip past the man's guard and slam a knife up to the hilt into his spinal column. That had been the 10th enemy combatant to rush his little trio in the past 5 minutes. It was getting frustrating to say the least. All around the group battles raged out onto the street as the evading sound and sand forces clashed with the home team of the Leaf. His single eye glanced about the chaos around him and noted with pride that the Konoha ninja were more than holding their own. Even with the advantage of surprise, the invaders could not get a strong foothold. With that in mind, Kakashi's thoughts turned back to the task at hand. It was imperative that he join the village defense, but at the same time he had a personal duty to uphold. Then there was the fact that he just sent 3 young genin against a force they couldn't possibly match up against, but there was nothing he could do at this point. The only chance they had was for the assault to be repelled before the ninja of the Leaf could turn their attention to the possible threat the sand container posed. And the best way he could see them surviving in the meantime was to stick together. Where the hell are you, Naruto? He thought as his gaze scanned the battlefield for any sign of orange. The hard and cruel shinobi in him said, with cold logic, that his last genin was long dead. Genjutsu had never been Naruto's strong point, and so his first thought was one of the boy falling prey to the opening attack. In that likely scenario, the best he could hope for was that someone had taken pity on the boy and left him lying asleep on the cold stone floor of the arena. An idea that was all but dashed when he had checked the surrounding area. The leaf shinobi in him, however, had a different view of things. It saw the fierce emotion reflected in his young Kunichi's eyes and found hope in her words. Perhaps Ebisu had managed to teach his young genin something worth of value. He would readily admit that he himself was only a marginal teacher, but where he could easily fail, a man like that could no doubt get through to a boy as wild as Naruto. Maybe, just maybe, Naruto had learned enough from the strange special Junin that he had been able to avoid the opening genjutsu and was instead managing to survive around the makeshift battlefield using his natural cunning. Perhaps the young genin in question had learned to properly use his shadow clones to maximize their potential on the battlefield. Or at the very least used the clones as decoys to aid his fellow leaf shinobi as he himself made it to safety. It was that thought that kept the veteran Junin going. With that in mind, the man noticed something that could help him. Across a particularly brutal stretch of combat, he saw a beacon of hope. It was the Hyuga boy, Neji, who had been slated to fight said previously mentioned genin, and with him stood the Hyuga clan head. He watched as the two combined to form a brutal tag team, with the elder, more experienced shinobi delivering harsh and brutal blows that disabled the victim long enough for the younger to finish them with precision. The Junin frowned as he turned around to look back at the two genin he had in tow. They had calmed down considerably in the time they had been out in the field and were now looking around at the fighting that surrounded them with less apprehension. He had no idea what kind of training Sarutobi Asuma had given his two young charges, but knowing what he did of the man, he would not be surprised if it was even more of a letdown than what he had imparted on to his two lesser talented genin. Asuma, while a good shinobi, was a naturally lazy person. With each of his young genin coming from clans with renown and the path for their personal development clear, Kakashi could easily see a scenario in which the other Junin simply allowed for the three ninja in training to focus on the techniques each of their families provided, while he simply taught them the bare minimum of what was required. It was a sad thought. Even more so when he figured that was pretty much what he had been doing. Note to self, he thought as he turned his attention back to his surroundings. When this is over, I'm going to work my own genin to the bone. But that was for another time. Right now his best bet at finding out the fate of his last young shinobi was across an expanse of pure violence. One he had to navigate while safeguarding the lives of two other less skilled and less experienced ninja. It would be difficult to say the least and would require a fair amount of skill to make sure everyone got out of this safe and in one piece. With that train of thought fixed, the Junin calmly reached his right hand up and pushed his forehead protector to the side. His now open red eye instantly began to help him analyze the situation at hand. Yes, it would be difficult, but luckily for them he wasn't called the copy ninja for the sake of it being catchy. With a deep breath, the leaf Junin turned his attention back to the young ninja that had followed him this far. Listen up, he barked, and immediately regretted it as the two genin jumped at the tone of his voice. We're about to get into some heavy fighting, so I need for you to do whatever I say. The two genin nodded as they stared at his mismatched eyes with their own wide. He ignored it as he gestured with his head to the dense fighting up ahead of them before he once again glanced around them to make sure the area was still clear enough for him to speak. We're going to be going over there to the front of that shopping area. The Hyuga clan head is there and may need some help. After we secure that section, I'll be asking for his help in finding Naruto. It shouldn't be a problem at all for him to hunt Naruto down using his Kekkei Genkai. But in order for this to work, I need to make sure you two are safe. That means you'll have to stay with me at all times so that I can protect you. Got it? They nodded their understanding as they glanced in the direction he had motioned in before. The boy, the Akamichi, grimaced at the sight of it. However, Kakashi's surprise, the young Yamanaka simply took a deep breath before she gripped the kunai in her hand tighter. Maybe he had done her a disservice in writing her off as simply another fangirl pretending to be a ninja. Maybe there was hope for them yet. All right, let's go, Kakashi declared as he set out at a brisk pace with the two genin in a trailing position. With any luck, the Hyuga clan head could help locate the wayward blonde. And at the very least he could tell him if his genin had been cut down or not. Go Gaki, go! Naruto ignored the shout from the white-haired shinobi as he leapt from his position on top of the toad summon. Flashing through a series of 3 seals mid-air, the blonde touched down before instincts drove him to the left in a roll across the ground. He stopped on one knee before he turned his attention back to where the shuriken that had nearly skewered him had came from. He turned his palm to the rapidly approaching sound kunoichi. Fuuten. Daitopa. Wind release. Great breakthrough. The chakra-infused gust rushed across the distance and slammed head-on into the approaching ninja. To her credit, she was prepared for the attack and crossed her arms to shield her face as chakra had her firmly anchored to the ground instead of uprooted like the blonde had initially hoped for. Still, he made do with what he had and launched forward into a body flicker. He came out of chakra transit and slid to a stop beside her as he kicked up dirt in his wake. The kunyachi reacted with instant violence as her hands snapped off a quartet of senbon at close range. The blonde shifted his body and grimaced as the metal needles entered into his body but didn't stop in his movement. Before her arms could begin to pull back, he had entered her space with the force of a hurricane. A strong hook with the left hand nearly leveled her as he transitioned it into a spinning elbow with the right. His opponent fell with her bell rung and he dropped his right knee into her stomach as he pulled free the blood-stained kunai and slammed it into her throat in the same motion. He leapt away from the already dying body as the toad sage hopped down to join him. He glanced at the now dead sound ninja in surprise before his face hardened. He gave the blonde a measured look before he nodded in what seemed like appreciation before he gestured with a hand to the new wounds the blonde sported. Naruto reached up with slightly shaking hands to each opposite shoulder before he pulled them free with a savage yank that surprised even him. The red-hot pain that flowed through the points of entry would have made most grimace. Not him. Besides, he had taken far worse from the needles before. Those poisoned? Jiraiya inquired as he gave a quick search around them. There were no enemies around them right now. No doubt the sight of the giant toad that had began to wreak havoc on the invaders was more than enough of an indicator as to who they were actually dealing with. Naruto looked at the blood-stained tips of the metal spikes before his now highly sensitive nose twitched. The toad sage watched fascinated as the blonde sniffed them before tossing them to the ground with a shake of his head. Don't think so. Didn't smell like anything but blood. The blonde replied as he rolled his shoulders in an attempt to mitigate the pain. Not going to slow me down anyway. The Sannin shook his head. Answers like that are what get you killed, kid. He chided the young shinobi before him. To his surprise, the small blonde met his gaze head on. If I die defending the village, I die doing something useful, right? Or at least that's what they say. The genin challenged with defiance clear in his eyes. The man opened his mouth to reply before he closed it. True, that was what they said. And it's what was expected of him as a Konoha shinobi, no matter how much he claimed to hate this place. At least he was able to remember that much. But even still, Naruto. The Sannin began as pinned him with his stare. Don't let anyone tell you you're not a damn Konoha shinobi. You've more than proven your worth on this day. No matter what you choose to do with your life, be proud of what you've accomplished here and now as you've fought and risked death along with your comrades. The blonde was surprised by the words. Unable to say anything in response, he simply stared back at the man. That seemed to be more than enough as Jiraiya smiled at his new student before he nodded as if finding something he had been looking for. I'm going to go up to the tower and see if I can't do something about that barrier Orochimaru has erected to keep the old man trapped. In the meantime, just keep doing what you've been doing, kid. Remember what we taught you and you'll be fine. The smile widened. You've more than proved you can handle your own. Good luck. It was all that he said before his body flickered away and left the blonde on his own. Naruto stared at the spot the sage had just vacated for a few seconds longer before his eyes flickered around to their surroundings again. With a deep breath, the blonde pulled his cloak closer to his body before he took off into the direction of the closest combat he could hear. The toad sage was right. He had more than proved his worth on this day. Now he had to make sure everyone knew it.
That's all for now. If you want to see next part, then please like this video and subscribe my channel. Thank you.